When I was about 12 or 13, my mum and dad owned a tow trucking company. This particular day, they went to our neighbouring state, so I had a few friends over and we were there alone. They probably came over around 12 PM, I'd say, and we were doing all the normal preteen stuff, watching movies, eating junk food, etc. It was winter, so it started to get dark pretty quickly, and we were expecting my mum and dad to come home around 6 or 7. But a little before my mum and dad were supposed to be home, there was a knock on my door. The way my house is set up, the front door was right next to my living room couch where all of us were hanging out. My mum is kind of known for being stuck in the 80s. She always wore a leather jacket, and one of my friends, Tina, looks through the door of the window and says, "It's your mum, I can see her jacket." I jump up immediately and look through my window, and it's pretty dark at this time, and I don't see my father's tow truck. I run to the front door screaming to Tina, "Don't answer the door, it's not my mum," but I was too late. She opens the door, and here comes this 6-foot, 250-pound man with a black stocking over his face, running through my door. All of my friends ran out of my living room to the kitchen where the back door is located and just ran away. Me, on the other hand, I obviously learned that day my fight or flight or freeze is to freeze. This man grabs a hold of me and picks me up in the air, and I was so scared, and I actually peed myself. I kind of don't remember how it happened, but I managed to escape his grip though, and I ran out of the back door down the block to a neighbour's house. We called the cops, and within a couple of minutes there were 6 cop cars, 3 on each end of the block. Eventually, we come to find out that it was my grown-ass neighbour. He allegedly was just playing a trick on us. A bunch of little girls, right? To this day, I'm 26 now. Whenever there's a knock on my door, I literally creep around my house so that people can't hear or see me, and I hide until they're gone. Our asshole neighbour did eventually get in trouble too. The cops didn't believe him, obviously, and there was a bit of back and forth between us and the courts and whatnot, but in the end, I don't actually know what happened to him. All I can say is that I sure hope nothing like this ever happens again. So I worked at a retail company, and I've been there for about 4 months now. About a month ago, we got a new worker, Jack, who works in the back. As I continuously go back and forth from the storefront to the break room located in the back, I'm quite friendly with all the guys working back there. I never saw Jack before, and I figured that he was new, and I decided to smile at him and said hi. I continued to do this every now and then when I saw him, and we would always have the same lunchtime, so we would spend the time just idle chat and break room and all that sort of stuff. Now, this was all fine and dandy, but I do like my personal time, and Jack would just talk and talk to me, even when I was on my phone, and obviously gave clues that I wanted to just be left alone. I thought that this was just annoying at best, and he then one day started to buy me candy, offer me his food, and then talked about this soup that he was going to make and ranted on about how amazing this soup would be. I just kind of acted interested with an "oh cool," and he asked if I wanted to try some multiple times. I just dismissively said sure, so he would leave me alone and didn't think anything of it. He then started to make me uncomfortable though with all the offering of the food and the candy, and always asking about my personal life too. He asked me how my relationship with my dad was, and I was naive and told him that he wasn't in the picture, but didn't give too much detail. He then started talking about how he wants more kids and how he wants to find a young woman to give him more kids and stuff like that. To be honest, I was getting creeped out at this point and was constantly dismissive with him. I did ask him how old he was because he looked young, maybe 30 at most, and he said that he was 43 though. That had alarms ringing for me in my head on why he kept pestering and talking to an 18-year-old non-stop about kids and how he loves the female body and whatnot. The last straw, though, on pretending to be nice to this guy was when, before I clocked out to leave, he rushed to me and told me that he had a present for me. I didn't know what the hell this guy had, but he decided to pull out a bouquet of fake roses and gave them to me. They were obviously cheap and had "Congrats Grad" on it, even though everyone knew I graduated high school last year, and it was just really weird. He told me that it was because I worked so hard, and at first I thought maybe he was just doing this in some sort of a fatherly, caring way, but putting two and two together with my mum, I knew that he was flirting with me. I threw them in the trash when I got home, disgusted that a grown 43-year-old man who knows that I was 18 would talk about a woman's body with me and give me roses like this in a flirtatious way. After that, I would text my mum anytime that we had lunch together, which is almost always the case, which drove me crazy. So her and I would sit in the car and I would eat to avoid him. Things were going good, and I just ignored him from then on and avoided eye contact, barely talking to him anymore. And I think he sort of got the hint eventually, and this is where the story should end, but it got worse than I could ever imagine. So Jack was starting to act up at work, cussing and acting too comfortable around his co-workers. I was closing up yesterday night with my supervisor, and she mentioned it, and we began talking about Jack. She mentioned how things are really bad with him, and I don't even know half of it. I told her about how he gave me roses, and she was honestly shocked. We both went into the office to cash me out and talked in private about it too. She said not to give my phone number, in which I replied that I would never, since he was a creepy man who wanted to fuck an 18-year-old girl. She said that her and Jack had went on a couple of dates together and kissed like twice, and he began sending her pictures of his, man area without any warning. I was kind of disgusted and found out that he was also talking to her, asking her to have babies and marry her and whatnot. She told me that he was married 3 times and also told her about how he had a domestic abuse case in the past. So, apparently, this guy beats up his wives. She then showed me how he would snap and call her a fat C and all this crazy stuff. And that the soup that he wanted to give me so badly, he and her made it together for their first date. She said that she didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore, and I agreed with her. But again, I wish the story ended there, but it got worse. She started shaking and crying, talking about this at this point, and she said that he had apparently been in jail before. I knew that, though, because he had told me about his drug dealing past in the 90s and how he changed and everything. But she told me that he was arrested and put on trial for first-degree murder. I was shocked to say the least. She started crying even more, saying how he knows where she lives and she has a son since she invited him over to watch a movie with them. I told her to report him for some abusive texts and inappropriate pictures, but she insisted on not because he knows where she lives and she lives with a minor son. But shit gets even crazier when she texts me the court case she found of him online. It says that he and his friends were in an argument about drugs and he pulled out a gun and said that he was going to kill everyone in the apartment. But reading this honestly made my heart sink. He was an average guy at first and didn't seem super violent, but now that I knew this, that he could just flip on a dime, I was kind of scared. Continuing to read the report, though, it said that him and another guy chased down one of the other dealer friends and shot him twice in the head at point-blank range. Jack was apparently put on trial, and his friend who was involved in the murder was sentenced, but his sentence was reversed due to lack of evidence, even though a witness did say that he was there when the shots were fired. He definitely did do it, in other words, but somehow got his sentence reversed or something. My poor supervisor is so stressed and scared, thinking that if she gets him fired, he'll legit come to her house and kill her and her son in cold blood like he did with his supposed friend. One chilling thing that she told me was, while Jack was at her house with him, her son talked about guns and he mentioned how he used to have a 9mm gun that he loved. I told her that I'll come with her to our manager and tell her about all this inappropriate stuff that he'd been doing. Mind you, he hasn't physically threatened her yet, but has definitely said some pretty mentally abusive shit over text. And now knowing how crazy and bipolar this guy can act, it's pretty scary. He recently told me that I was mean, and I just laughed it off, but who knows what this guy is thinking when he says that someone's mean. And he still has me on his radar of girls that he wants to fuck, and it's honestly terrifying. I've actually been waiting to quit this job for a while since management is so shit, and now knowing my manager hired a murderer full well knowing his criminal past, I'm out of here at this point. A man who shot another man blank point range twice in the head, gave me flowers and was trying to make me have kids with him. And one of the worst parts about this is that the manager loves Jack. She was even talking about promoting him to supervisor as well. He's been disrespectful to multiple supervisors, is texting profane and abusive texts, and has sent dick pics to my supervisor. I really do hope that he gets fired, and I hope my supervisor gets a restraining order or something to keep him away because he's obsessed with her. I mean, I was just his second option, and I was good at deflecting him, thank God. And so, I'm quitting my job soon. Too much stress, and I cannot look at that man anymore without feeling legitimate fear and queasiness, knowing what he has done and how he treated my supervisor and I. I hope that I never have to see him again because he is so unstable, and who knows what he could do. I do need the money, but this isn't worth it. So I just moved into this house about a month ago now, and it's new. And there have already been about 5 different attempted break-ins now. The first night in the new house, I was upstairs with my wife, and I went downstairs to grab something and saw a light move across the room. I didn't think too much of it and wrote it off as a reflection from someone's headlight shining through the window or something, but the next night it happened again. My wife and I were upstairs again and both saw a light shining up the staircase. The only possible way that this could happen is if someone was either in our house or backyard, as we have a 6-foot privacy fence, and given the location of our staircase inside the house, it was impossible. I grabbed my gun and told my wife to lock herself in the bedroom and I'd call her when it was safe. All the doors were locked still, so no one was inside. However, the side gate was open. I called the cops, but since we live outside the city limits, we're under jurisdiction of the county sheriff, which means that their response time is about 30 to 60 minutes. After they arrived, they took my statement, and my wife and I went to get a lock for the side gate. About 3 days later, I leave to grab some snacks for a movie night with the missus, and she calls me about 5 minutes later, asking if I'm downstairs, and accidentally locked myself out. And I wasn't. I drove back home as fast as I could, but by the time that I got there, no one was there. This pattern has happened 4 more times now too. I leave, and 5 or 10 minutes later, my wife calls asking if I'm outside, so whoever this person or people are, they're definitely watching our house. Oddly enough, these events never happen when I'm at work though, only when I'm home for the night and then leave again. The most recent incident was the night of Thanksgiving though, and my friend and I left to go grab some alcohol for the after-dinner party, and my wife calls saying our 3-month-old puppy is going berserk, barking at the front door and growling, and she can hear people talking outside and someone actively trying to pick the lock. She said that she tried to call 911 but was put on hold. So my friend calls as we're driving home, and we pull up about 2 minutes later and no one's there, but I do hear a car start down the road and tires squeal driving away. And there are some pretty gnarly tool marks all over our deadbolt, like they tried to use a knife to get in or something. The cops came 45 minutes later, took a statement and left, and nothing against the police in the area, but their response time is really a bit disheartening. I have since installed cameras by the front door and side gate, and have a security system being installed on Wednesday. The police say it's just people looking for empty houses to loot appliances from because we're in a new development and all, and I don't buy it though. None of my neighbors have reported anything happening to them, and our house is very clearly lived in. And a scary thought has crossed my mind that maybe they're not targeting to steal things. Maybe they're targeting us as people. To be quite honest, I feel like a prisoner in my own house, and I just don't know what to do. Do you guys have any ideas? I used to live in a very small town that was predominantly safe for kids. Only had some drug issues, really, and my house was located in a small and upscale part of the town, which mainly housed families. There was a small pond with lots of green in the neighborhood that was about a 5-minute walk from my house, I'd say. To get to the pond, you had to go down a grass hill. Neighborhood kids, including myself, would always go down to the pond for hours to catch frogs and skip rocks and all that good stuff. So, on this particular day, it was raining and pretty cold, so there were no other kids at the pond. My best friend, her brother, who was 1 year older than us, and myself decided to head down to the pond for a bit. After about half an hour, we see at the top of the hill a minivan pull up. We didn't think anything of it because there was a neighborhood mailbox at the top of this hill, as well as a lot of people stopped there to get their mail. A man started to get out of the minivan, and I remember him being older, probably in his 60s, and another note too is since we lived in a small town, everyone kind of knew everyone, or at least could recognize everyone, and I remember thinking that it was strange that I'd never seen this man before in town or in the neighborhood. He got out and just stared at the three of us for what seemed a pretty long time. All of a sudden, he yelled at us and said, "It's not safe down there, you kids better come up here." My best friend and her brother looked terrified, and I had this gut feeling that something just wasn't right. We didn't say anything back, and he continued to repeat the phrase, "It's not safe down there, you kids better come up here." Now, there was nothing unsafe about what we were doing or where we were standing or anything, so the whole request was really strange, but it started to become more like an order than a request. And our fight or flight reaction kicked in, and we all booked it up the other side of the hill, which was only about a few meters away from him in the minivan. As soon as he saw us running, he got into his minivan too and started driving slowly behind us. He was literally following us too until he reached my house. Luckily, my garage door was open and my parents' 2 cars were parked inside. We hid behind one of the parents' cars and watched as he pulled to the side of my house and parked. My parents were inside, but obviously had no idea what was happening. He stayed parked in front of my house for a couple of minutes until my dad came outside to take out the trash and saw the 3 of us hiding. I guess the man saw my dad and drove away, but as soon as he left, we told my parents everything. Even until this day, 12 years later, my parents still think that we were just being overdramatic and that it was a man that was just genuinely concerned for our safety, but because of the weather. Nonetheless, we weren't allowed to go back to the pond anymore, and I don't blame them for thinking this though, because the 3 of us tended to work things up a bit and be a bit dramatic. But on this instance, I knew from the way that I had that strange feeling when I first saw him at the top of the hill that something was just off. And to this day, I still believe that he was planning something. I'm sure many people know now that a shooting took place at Stoneman Douglas High School on Valentine's Day this year. I was a junior at the time, and I've been at Douglas since the beginning of freshman year. Now it's my senior year, and seniorities is really kicking my butt, but anyway, here's the story. So it was Valentine's Day, like I said, where I could see some people holding Valentine carnations and teddy bears while walking between classes and whatnot. I really didn't care much about the whole event, but secretly I did kind of hope to get something from some friends of mine. We had a mandatory fire drill in the morning, important to know, like the school board requires us sometimes to do. Time passed and it was on to the 3rd period, which was my study hall class, or personalization as the school says. There I would do some homework and surf the web on my phone. I suddenly had the urge to go into the bathroom near the end of the class. Sometimes I go into pee in 3rd period and sometimes in 4th. But keep this in mind too. So then I walked to my 4th period class, which is in the 1300 building, or the science building as we call it. You can see in pictures that it's about 10 to 15 meters away from where the 1200 building, aka freshman building, was. A very, very short walking distance, in other words. I go in my physics classroom where we finished a virtual lab experiment, and it was near the end of class, and I looked at the clock, pondering if I should go to the bathroom again because I drank a lot of water today. It's kind of a hassle to go to the bathroom in this class actually, because every time I go pee in the 1300 building, the bathroom is always locked, so I walk over to the freshman building to do my business instead. And even sometimes the first floor bathroom is locked because of drug usage. Douglas is literally called a pot school by others. So I climb up the stairs to go to the second floor. But just this time, I decided not to go because, well, school was almost out anyways. The fire alarm rings, red flag number 1, which I thought was super weird because we already had a fire drill in the morning. It was probably culinary class again, so I didn't pay much attention and walked out the door to my designated area with my classmates like fire procedures had us do. I left my backpack behind and just took my phone with me, and then I heard the sounds. I stopped walking 3 steps away from the door and looked in the direction of the freshman building. Fireworks? Is this some sort of simulation? Who would set up fireworks at this time? Suddenly, I had a very bad feeling wash over me, and my heart started to race, and in the back of my mind, I thought that maybe that there could be gunshots. Yet, I was still in denial because Parkland is a really safe community. I mean, this is a place where upper middle class people reside and where crime rates are really, really low. I was just standing in the doorway wanting some sort of confirmation that, yes, this was happening when I heard it again. My mind went absolutely blank at this point. It was like someone took control of my body and flipped my fight or flight switch on. I turned away from the direction of the freshman building, went back in the classroom and bolted toward the fire escape door out in the back. I had a couple of students follow me too, but they turned back at the last second to stay in class. I didn't really care though, I just wanted out at this point. Once out the door, I encountered a class who was out in their area and also thought that it was just a fire drill. And suddenly, it just occurred to me that I just ran out of the classroom when I wasn't supposed to. That was seriously my first thought when I was outside. I started to walk back in the direction to my class to follow the procedure because, yes, my dumbass thought nothing serious was happening. And more gunshots ran out in the air, which I still thought were fireworks, but I decided to stay in place with the group. Usually during fire drills, administrators would drive around in their golf carts to check out on teachers and students and whatnot. I saw one a couple of meters from me, and I was about to walk up to him to say that I was lost when he just suddenly drove away super fast. Multiple police cars came around the corner with their lights flashing, and a helicopter flew above me too, and that's when I knew that things were really serious. I could still hear gunshots really close too, so I ran somewhere to the edge of the school that had fences and was near the football or baseball field. I didn't know what path I specifically went. All I knew is that I was yeeting out of there quickly. I tried climbing up the fences like other people were doing to escape, but I'm not athletic enough and I just slipped down like a loser. Suddenly, a chubby freshman limped up to where I am and a small group of people, saying, "Help me, I've been shot." He cried out with tears running down his face, and I looked at his leg and there was a gaping red bullet hole in his ankle and splatters of blood just everywhere around it. And maybe even a peak of white that was his bone, I think. My eyes were wide open at this point, mouth practically hanging open. Someone next to me said that it looks fake and he was still crying for help, but we were just frozen solid. Suddenly, an adult male came out of nowhere and directed us to go run and hide where a middle school nearby was. No one was doing anything to save the poor boy, so I marched up to the guy and yelled out at him, "A person is shot." He legit did not hear me though, so I practically spit in his face again that the boy was shot. Finally, he said, "What and where?" Still hearing the gunshots that were directly behind me, I pointed at the boy and then proceeded to sprint across the football field with my heart pounding out of my chest. Halfway across the field, I called my mum in hysterics, saying that there was a shooting. She didn't understand what was going on and was confused because school wasn't out yet, and finally she understood and started yelling that I should run away as fast as I can, obviously. From my dad's point of view, her voice was apparently so loud that the neighbor came over and asked what was happening. Eventually, I walked across to Walmart and to the Bank of America where they picked me up. I think the aftermath was the hardest part. When I got home, I was really calm, like nothing ever happened. And I only broke down crying when I was called by my older sister who was in another high school when she heard the news. In the afternoon and supper time, I was joking around and laughing like I normally was. Basically, I was just in absolute denial. The day after, I was in my shared bathroom with my sister on Twitter while brushing my teeth, and I looked at the names of some of the victims and saw some faces that I knew, and I just had a massive breakdown. So many what-ifs came to my mind. What if I went to the bathroom during fourth period like I would sometimes do at the end of the class? I legit probably would have been gunned down. What if the shooter did manage to successfully break the windows and shoot from there? I would have been smack dab in his line of sight when I was outside the 1300 building just standing around. 2 weeks later, I returned to the school to reclaim the nest, the principal called it. What I didn't know was that one of the victims was in my psychology class, and I never knew that she existed till now. I kept looking at the empty desk that was once hers, and every time I did, I felt numb inside. My teacher would later put a flower pot on her desk every day in her absence. Then in my statistics class, there was another victim, which meant another empty desk. My stats teacher asked with tears in his eyes for us to reshuffle our seating arrangement around because he didn't want to look at the empty desk any longer. Still to this day, I have nightmares of being involved in shootings and would be scared of loud noises, basically PTSD. But throughout the couple of months as information was coming in, I would learn that my sister used to go to school with the shooter. She described him as lonely and weird. Additionally, my male friend got death threats from him and would send him pictures of guns, threatening to shoot him. Yes, he did report him before, but administrations didn't do anything, and also he later testified in court. Also, I think I do know the identity of the boy who got shot in the ankle, but I'm not 100% sure. Apparently, the guy that I screamed at was an off-duty police officer who helped wrap the boy up, and the boy gave him a good description of the shooter that was a massive help. I'm not going to confront him though, because I don't want to bring up bad memories anymore. Things still aren't back to normal in Douglas, and it never will be until perhaps once the freshmen who were there that day graduate. There's always some sort of tension in the atmosphere, as if something major was going to happen. Lately, a lot of fire alarms have been going off, and every time it does, everyone would just go silent. I sincerely hope that no one would have to go through what my school and I did, but I know shootings will keep happening because that's the American way, right? And finally, I hate seeing or hearing his name, but the person who did this was Nicholas Cruz. So, I don't even know where to start, to be honest, but my house, which I rent, has a ground floor and 2 floors, so 3 in total. I was getting ready to go out, and I went to the first floor in my room to get my makeup, and went to the second floor in my flatmate's room to do my makeup there. I go back in my room around 45 minutes later, and I see 3 of my purses on the floor, and the shoulder handle, I'm not sure if that's the word, has been cut on 2 of them and a bit on the 3rd one. Both purses are cut the same way in 2 spots. I start getting a bit freaked out because no one is in the house except me and my flatmate, and we've been together the whole time upstairs. In the living room, which is on the ground floor, we left the back window door open to air out the room as we had some people over the night before. The door in the living room leads to a tiny garden which is protected by a tall fence, which is more protected by another wired fence, and I doubt anyone would be able to just climb on it and come in, cut purses, mind you, and take no money or cards from them and then just leave. The complex has 8 flats, so all the tiny gardens are connected in a long line, but we are only connected to one as we're the last flat in the line. So absolutely nothing was stolen or even moved, and we see no marks anywhere, but it's still weird, so we called the police to find an explanation. The police come and check the evidence. There's also a wet spot on the carpet in the room about 5 centimeters long, and how the purses are cut. We ended up concluding that it must have just been a fox that went into the house, went upstairs, ate the bags and left, based on the fact that a fox tried to enter the living room one time the same way a few weeks back. but the police said that it was not an animal cut. It's most probably a knife cut, and asks if we've had any problems with anyone, like an ex or something. We haven't, and most people don't even know where we live. And no one really knows how to get to my room, as the house is pretty complicated. The stairs in the house are metal and spiraled, and you basically hear it from every spot in the house too if someone is on the stairs. Police call forensics to ask for evidence and whatnot, and forensics say that they don't know what they can do as they can't take any fingerprints off the bags because of the texture, and the wet spot is apparently dry by now. Police said that they've never heard of something like this before and that it makes no sense, so it must be a ghost or something. Who says that, right? Anyway, they marked it off as a burglary and then they just left. I should mention, though, that the night to the morning before, we had the music pretty loud and our neighbour texted us pretty angrily to stop the noise. I mean, he does know the house as we have the same structure and he was the only one with the easy access, but he's like 75 years old and all the encounters we've had so far, he's been really nice. So, we've been left with something or someone coming in our house through the back garden that's protected by very high walls and wired fencing, entering the living room, passing by the PS4, the TV, expensive speakers, goes into the hallway, passes by very expensive shoes, goes up the stairs, enters the bedroom, cuts the handles to my purses, does not take absolutely anything, makes no noise, and then just leaves. Obviously, I slept in my flatmate's room last night after everything, and today I went into the bedroom to clean it, and I actually found one of the missing handle pieces in my bed, under the blanket. I don't know what's going on, but nobody has any explanation, and this whole situation is just really creepy and weird. Also, today, after one day that I wrote this, I was putting my shoes on, and I picked up something from the shoe chair, and another piece of black crocodile print leather just fell out from underneath. This is at the hallway shoe section on the ground floor. I thought that it was another part of the black bag, but I realized it was a part of my flatmate's black leather boots. So that means that this person or animal also cut one piece of one boot. It's not her, those are definitely her favorite boots, and then they just hid it where they did. So far, they've cut a black crocodile print purse and a snake print purse, but today we found a black piece of crocodile boot. Same material, different parts of the house. And we also got a bottle of wine from our neighbour to apologise for the noise, and I saw him today by accident. He thanked us for the wine and seemed generally nice, and as if he got over it. We did this so that we can start talking again and ask if anything weird like this has happened and explain what happened to us. And he said exactly this. Nothing happened. Thanks for the heads up. I don't know what's going on, but I'm feeling really on edge. Either there is a ghost in our house and something paranormal is going on, or there's someone sneaking into our house somehow and they're doing some really weird shit. I'm not sure if this was a trendy thing for anyone else in the early to mid-2000s, but when I was a child during this time, it appeared that many characters in books and films and TV shows had pen pals, distant figures with whom they were best friends and to whom they scribed whatever was going on in their lives. One of these TV shows, Grange Hill, actually featured an episode where a girl met up with a pen pal, who turned out not to be a French boy her age, but a creepy middle-aged man who shoved her in the back of his van. Apparently, I didn't let that sway me from seeking out a pen pal of my own. Anyway, I searched pen pals on Google and clicked on the first few sites. The one that I settled on already had a list of children's names, ages, locations, small bios, and an email address too. I scourged the page, but couldn't find anyone my age. The youngest girl was Lottie, aged 12, from Amsterdam. So I clicked on her email address and tapped out a cheerful message telling her that I was from the UK and that I was only 8, but I was really mature for my age and please be my online friend. I remember she responded pretty quickly, and I remember that she told me that it didn't matter that I was only 8. She liked younger girls better anyway. Retrospectively, that was creepy as hell to say, but I was 8 and naive. So, we struck up a friendship and we would email back and forth. I told her everything about my annoying friends at school, my parents fighting, my love for Jacqueline Wilson books and Doctor Who. Like the idiot that I was, I told her the country I lived in too and the town. I didn't give her my address, but I was stupid enough to send her a picture of myself. She didn't send anything back, and I didn't think to ask because, once again, I was an idiot. She told me that I was really pretty. Things are a little bit fuzzy to remember, but one thing I do remember is that she said that she liked my eyes. A few weeks of this goes on, and my older sister was the only person who knew, and she told me one day that she wasn't comfortable with this. Because she's only older by a year, though, I thought I knew better and brushed her off. But she asked me to tell our mum, and I didn't want to, but I had a feeling in my gut that I should. And so, that evening, I told her. Putting on my most persuasive voice, I tried to convince her that Lottie was really cool and nice. But my mum is protective, and she knew straight away that something was wrong. She asked to see the emails and told me, and Lottie isn't a girl. She's a man preying on me. Mum pointed at the typing style and the email address. She doesn't even talk like a little girl, she said. You see, Lottie's email address wasn't simply like @hotmail.com or @gmail.com or something like that. It was at something that, according to Mum, looked like a business name, not something that a little girl would have an email with. Her writing style had also changed over the weeks that we'd been talking. It had gone from normal to typing in slightly caps and slightly lowercase, and this didn't give my mum a good feeling. She told me to stop emailing Lottie, and I lied and I said that I would, but naturally I carried on. I must admit, though, that I was a little bit unnerved now. I emailed Lottie a few days later saying that my mum wanted her mum's email address. She started questioning me why when she replied, but eventually gave it. I was relieved, and in hindsight, I should have wondered why she didn't want to give me the email address straight away anyway. Maybe I realized this a little subconsciously too, because I actually asked her for a photo of her and another with her mum. Again, she questioned why and asked if something was wrong, and I just told her that my mum wanted to know what she looked like. There was no reply for a few days, but then finally I get an email of her. Attached were 2 pictures, one of her and one of her with her mum. But they just didn't look right. They didn't look like a normal photograph, if you know what I mean. They looked really polished and professional. And I think by this point, the unsettling feeling was just too much for me to handle. I'm not good at shutting things down with someone, and even to this day, I can't calmly and slowly end a relationship or friendship, so I replied to the email with the pictures and just wrote that I never wanted to speak to her again. Lottie didn't take it very well. Not well at all, actually. She told me that she hated me and that I was ugly, and she said a few other nasty things, but what freaked me out was when she told me that she would make me as miserable as I made her. You can guarantee that if I wasn't scared before, I was shitting myself then. I cried and told my mum, who was pissed about me lying but worried as well, so I guess when she banned me from using the internet for a few weeks, it was actually a protective measure as well as a punishment. But nothing did happen in the end, and this made me think that maybe I'd freaked out on Lottie for no reason. Maybe she hadn't lied. It was only a year and a bit later when I finally stumbled upon a new show and found out that those pictures, they weren't Lottie after all. Does anyone else remember an Australian show called Mortified? Well, the photos that she had sent were actually headshots of the lead actress, Marnie Kennedy. So Lottie, I don't know who you are or what your intentions were, but I'm glad that my mum stopped me from seeing you. So this happened a few weeks ago. I recently graduated from college with a degree in biology, but decided to take a minute for myself before applying to medical school. My school was in a a dangerous area, and I still rent in the area because my roommate is a master's student at the same university. We live about 5 blocks off campus on a street where you would not want to be caught alone at night. So one day, I was by myself in our apartment just jamming to some tunes, and I heard a banging on the door. This was odd to me because my apartment is a row home style apartment with 2 other apartments below me and a front door, which I had most certainly locked behind me when I entered the building about 10 minutes prior. It was also concerning because I'm a 5-foot-tall woman and currently alone. Since we live on the top floor, nobody but my roommate and I are ever up on the 3rd floor, and I had not recently submitted a maintenance request or anything. I turned the music off and I sat still for a moment waiting to see if it happened again, and the banging started once more. Now, I recognized that this was pretty stupid, but I walked to the front door and opened it the tiniest crack to see a really large, dirty, heavy-set man with a beard on the other side. I asked, "Can I help you?" and he looked at me in the eye and said, "I'm here to fix the air conditioning leak. You need to let me inside the unit so that I can make the repairs." My management company only has one regular maintenance worker who I was familiar with, and I'd never seen this man standing at my door previously. He took a step forward while I quickly said "wrong place" and slammed and locked the door. Initially, I wasn't too concerned because maybe he was just in the wrong place, right? But I emailed my landlord to ask about maintenance reps in the area, to which she replied, "The company had an HVAC technician out today, but none to your address. What did he look like?" After describing him as a large, heavier white man with a full beard, she responded, "That was not our HVAC rep. He's a small, thin man. I'm not sure who was out there." And now I'm worried about my safety because clearly someone has keys to our building, and even my management company can't account for who he may have been. They will also not change the front door lock, so I'm kind of on my own with this one. I'm all ears if you guys have any ideas on how to keep myself safe. A few years ago, my roommate and I lived on the 3rd floor on the backside of an apartment building. She was in the process of moving out though, so it was mostly just my dog George Washington and I. I knew just about every neighbor in my building, and from what I knew, they were pretty super chill. In order to understand this story, I need to explain the way my apartment was set up. In order to get to the door to enter our apartment, you would have to pass by my window, which was a very long window in my bedroom. I had never had any issues until about 2 a.m. on a Saturday, well, technically a Sunday. I heard footsteps on the walkway outside my window, and I saw a shadow pass it. I usually am a pretty groggy person when I first wake up, but ever since it had just been me, I was more aware of my surroundings, so it kind of jolted me awake. I had a nightstick under my bed, so I grabbed it and debated about what to do for the next 30 seconds. I opened up my bedroom door quietly, right in front of our main entrance, and started to notice the hand jiggle ever so slightly. Clearly, at this point, I knew I could either A, shit my pants, B, get attacked, or C, scare the person off. Choice A seemed to be the most likely for my personality type, but choice C it was. So I turned on the outside light and kicked the outside door as loud as I could and screamed a string of words that would make a sailor blush. I heard footsteps turn and quickly walked the other way, and I called my stepdad, who thankfully lived close by. He came by to check on me and wanted me to stay with him, but I said that I would be fine, and off he went. The next morning I got up and got ready for church, not really thinking of the night before. I returned home shortly after and was texting on my phone as I reached to get my keys and put them into the lock on my front door. I couldn't find the keyhole though, so I looked up and noticed that my entire lock had been bashed in. It hadn't really set in what had happened yet, so I opened the door and looked in, and a lot of my stuff was gone. Televisions, computers, jewelry, but luckily they left my doggo there and he was unharmed. The irony though is that I got him to be my best friend and a guard dog. He fulfills one of those roles, and I'll let you figure out which one. My brain caught up with my surroundings though, so I grabbed George and ran outside to call the police. They came out, guns drawn, as they cleared my apartment, and it felt surreal to talk with forensics in my own residence. They never found out who did it, and in the end it worked out okay. A lot of the jewelry they stole was from an ex that I had intentions of pawning anyway, and renter's insurance covered that, so I got some sweet new technology upgrades. However, I still am very unsettled internally about that night and day, particularly about that night. I replay it and often wonder what would have happened had I have not woken up, or if the person wouldn't have been so easily turned away. It also is very unsettling to know that they were watching me, waiting to leave for church so that they could break in. Ever since that day, I keep my head on a swivel and pay extremely close attention to my surroundings, particularly when I get home. These experiences all happened 20 plus years ago in the home that I grew up in. My sister and I and both of our friends, we always felt a bit of a sense of dread originating from the side of the upstairs where the guest room was. When going upstairs, there was a hallway where if you went to the right it led to the game room and the guest room and the bathroom, and if you went to the left it led to our bedrooms. Oftentimes at night, usually right after dusk, the lights in the hallway would just turn off by themselves. I remember hanging out in the game room often, and I recall the hallway lights just turning off. Upon investigating, the actual light switches were turned off too. This would happen even when nobody was home, and to this day, I sometimes have nightmares of that hallway and the lights going out, leaving me alone and vulnerable in the pitch-black darkness. Though, in reality, the lights in the game room never went off on their own, and neither did lights in the other parts of the house, so there was still some light, I guess. The closet in the guest room was odd too. My sister refused to go near it, in fact. She said that she was terrified of it, especially at night. The cats also refused to go near it. In fact, they refused to go near the guest room altogether. In one instance, a friend forcibly carried one of our cats into the guest room, and she was absolutely terrified, fur standing on end and hissing and everything. She clawed my friend and escaped away from the guest room as quickly as possible. There were also often black widows just hiding in there as well, and the black widows acted a bit strangely. I remember my mum spraying about 4 or 5 as they walked out of the closet, running towards us aggressively. I've encountered a lot of black widows since then, and never seen any act like that. But they're just normally shy and non-aggressive. The exterminators weren't sure why so many black widows came from that closet too. It was an interior room without any vents and windows, and only one wall was an exterior wall. We didn't have them in any other part of the house too, except maybe the garage every once in a while. Maybe I should omit the Black Widow incident, since it can be explained by the mundane, but it fit a pattern of just odd things originating around that guest room. Sometimes when I was home alone at night, I would hear downstairs someone going through the flatware in one of the kitchen drawers. Sometimes they would be disturbed if I examined the drawers after hearing it. Sometimes the cats would be downstairs, and when this happened they were always in a deep sleep, like they didn't hear the noise at all. It happened so often that eventually I just ignored it, and only after moving out did I think how strange it was. There were a few more frightening experiences, but the most frightening to me personally was one time right around dusk when I was going to the bathroom in the guest room. I was at an age where I didn't want to share the bathroom with my sister anymore. So I was home alone, and I always had a bad habit of just locking doors, so I had locked it. I was in the middle of doing my business when the door handle to the bathroom just started violently jiggling, like someone was frantically trying to get in. It must have lasted a few seconds too, and then just suddenly stopped. It wasn't a normal kind of jiggling too. It was as if someone who was seriously disturbed was doing it. I can't imagine a sane person jiggling a door handle like that anyway. There was just something unnatural and frightening about the way the door handle was moving. I was frozen in fear for a couple of minutes and asked if someone was there, and there was no response. I eventually worked up the courage to open the door, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. I immediately called my parents, who called the police, who came and did a thorough search of the home. And of course, they found nothing, and all the doors and the windows were locked, and the alarm was on, and it was set, and they basically said that it was impossible for an intruder to have gotten in. In another instance, too, I was downstairs playing some video games, and I was home alone with my sister, and she flew downstairs white as a sheet and told me that she'd just seen a red orb about the size of a golf ball just flying through her room. Not quite in a random pattern, too, but almost as if it had some sort of intelligence to it. She said that it resembled a laser-pointer dot, but it was a three-dimensional sphere. I laughed it off at the time and didn't believe her, but my sister reported many instances of her being home alone and her door handle opening on its own and the door to her room just being opened. And, of course, nobody would be there. It eventually frightened her so much, in fact, that she didn't want to be home alone anymore. It happened one time where her friend was alone in the house with her too, and her friend didn't like to come over at night after that. In another instance, I heard the phone ring. I was home alone at night, but it was only ringing on the old phone in the guest room. I picked it up, thinking maybe it was a friend, but it was this really weird static. There was something almost malevolent about the static too. I can't really explain it because, well, there was no voices or anything, but the static just sounded sinister, and it scared the hell out of me at the time, and I hung up the phone and just ran out of there. There were several instances too where our cats would be startled all of a sudden and just start staring at something. Their eyes would follow whatever it was as it slowly moved, and I would try to see what they were looking at, but there was nothing. Both cats would just stare at the unseen object or thing and follow it exactly identically with their eyes as if they both saw it simultaneously too. This happened at least once or twice a week too. I had a lot of odd nightmares in that house too. So did my sister, in fact. This is getting long though, so I won't go into it, but there were also some other odd and frightening experiences, but I think that those could be chalked up to more mundane explanations, such as a time when I swear that I heard someone whisper in my room in the middle of the night. But it's possible it was just the fan rustling something and my imagination distorted the experience. Another experience that I could share, but I was so young at the time that I'm unsure if it actually happened or if it was just a nightmare, but I recall it as a true memory though. It was in the middle of a bad storm in the afternoon and my mum was taking a nap. The front door lock just unlatched itself and the front door just creaked open. Nobody there, so I shut it. A few minutes later and the doorbell rings and I look out the peephole and it looks like 3 or 4 figures that had hoods on and no faces, or at least in the shadow to where I couldn't see. Like the Grim Reaper, no scythes though, were just stood there, completely still. They had a menacing presence too, and I screamed and my mum came and looked out and there was nothing there. Again, I'm not really sure if I dreamed this or if it was an actual memory, but something like that must have happened because I distinctly remember the neighborhood watch just increasing its patrol of our street after my mum told them some creepy people came to our door. More than likely, this was nothing paranormal and just my young overactive imagination and the decay of young childhood memories over the decades. I must have been 6 or 7 at the time, I think. Those other experiences happened when I was well into my early teenage years though, so I can recall them for sure. The house was a new construction home, built in what was years before just an empty field, so I'm not sure how anything paranormal would have originated. I'd like to hear ideas though. But as soon as we moved out of the house, there were 0 paranormal experiences. I stopped having nightmares except for once in a while, and when I did it was of the old house too. The cats also seemed more relaxed, and I never saw them staring at something unseen in the house again. I always try to rule out the paranormal, and will only consider it paranormal if it fits a certain pattern of unexplained phenomenon. And these experiences, well, they were reported by multiple people, and our cats also reacted strangely. and I've never experienced anything paranormal since moving out of that house, which is odd to me. Oddly enough, though, my parents, they said that they never experienced anything paranormal in that house, and I'm at a loss to explain how or why any of this happened. But sometimes I wonder if I should stop by my old house and talk to the current occupants to see if they've experienced anything odd. But of course, I have no idea about how to go about this without seeming like an insane person and possibly having the cops pulled on me. So, yeah, those are my experiences, and I'll update you guys if I ever go back. Thanks for listening. I'm a nurse, and I graduated a little over 2 years ago, and I'm working at a really nice place right now. But this happened when I was doing my internship at another nursing home. So, I just turned 19, and I remember because my internship started a little after my birthday in August. I had come by for a talk the day before I started and was assigned to one of the nurses already working there. Her name was Louisa. Louisa had been working there for 20 plus years, and she was going to show me the ropes and whatnot. So there we were, just walking around the building, a 2-story building with several hallways that housed over 40 patients. Louisa walked me through the normal day routine and was showing me a couple of the rooms, where the sheets were, how to get to the meds, just boring basic nursing home stuff. When we finally got to the end of the hallway, she kept looking at one of the doors. It was closed, unlike the others. She opened one of the closets and continued her walk, but her gaze just kept wandering off to the door. But when I finally asked her why she kept looking at the door, she told me that we don't use that room, and it's been closed off for a while. She didn't want to talk about it anymore, so I just let it go. A few months into my internship, and I was allowed to let go of Louisa and do stuff on my own. She was still the person that I went to for questions and whatnot, but I was pretty much on my own during work hours. We all got assigned rooms during the morning report, and I found myself assigned to the rooms next to the one that we don't use. Even though Louisa's talk got me a little freaked out, I'm not someone to back down, so I kept my mouth shut and just worked my shift. After my shift, I went to put my stuff back into the closet, and when I opened the closet, I could hear a faint buzzing sound. It was distorted, a sound that you would hear if you would crumple a paper over the intercom or something, but with buzzing mixed into it. I didn't think much of it until I remembered what Louisa had said about the room. Naturally, my curiosity won it over my fear, and I went to check if the door was locked. But mind you, all of the doors are electrical, so in the case of a fire or emergency, they shut and lock themselves. The door wasn't locked though, and I figured it must have been broken and thought to myself that maybe this was why they don't use this room. But when I opened it, the sound got louder, but the room was empty. There was nothing in there but a pair of curtains just hanging from the ceiling, and the sound came from the door. The little electric box made the sound, the weird crackling buzzy sound. I remember walking closer to see if I was hearing it right, and the little light on the box turned on, and I could hear groaning or moaning coming from the box. I never knew until then if I was a fight or flight person, but I left and shut the door behind me, and I just got out of there real quick. That night, something inside me told me that I had to know what the story was behind it, so I texted one of my classmates who was also doing her internship there. She told me that the nurses that she was assigned to had told her that the room was apparently a gateway for the people who had passed away in the nursing home. The electrical box was apparently a means for them to talk to us, and the weird groaning sound was them trying to get back to us. They don't use that room because whenever they assigned a patient to that room, they reported nightmares and weird sightings and just overall being uncomfortable and scared. I called my school the next morning and got transferred to a new internship where I still work to this day, and if you ask me if I regret doing that, not one bit. I'm of Navajo descent, and I'm a quarter, and my grandfather is pure. This was quite a while ago, but every summer we used to go and stay at my uncle's house. He has 3 floors, and the basement was pretty much the living room and had a slope that went above ground, so it was only half underground and had windows and everything. So, for some odd reason, they leave these huge windows open at night. I've seen things snooping around pretty often, and mainly as distant silhouettes or 6 feet tall coyotes. Could just be normal, I suppose, but very odd, so I knew exactly what to expect when you voluntarily leave a window large enough for a person to easily climb in through, right? So, this situation had obviously already made me feel uncomfortable because of stories about when we were babies. My family was staying in my Gnarly's trailer, and she had those individual square locks, and they woke up in the early dark hours of the next morning to find all the locks on the floor and the doors just wide open. And my brother was missing a lock of hair too. My Gnarly had to allegedly do some sort of ritual or prayer or something like that to save him. And he grew up to be successful and is following his dreams now, so I don't know how much truth there is to it, but he's okay. So we're all getting ready for bed, and my grandma was sleeping on the couch, my brother and his friend sleeping on the other couch, and me and my aunt were sleeping on a mattress behind the couch that my grandma was on. Everyone else went camping outside to skinwalker hunt, and everyone got settled and just went to bed, and my aunt stole my pillow, and around 1 or so I woke up feeling a bit uneasy. Initially I thought it was just my neck from a lack of pillow, so I sat up and looked around for it, and everything just appeared normal and nothing was in the windows, but there were some distant flashing lights that we see every so often, and I just went back to sleep though because it was all pretty normal to me. So around 4 a.m. I wake up again, and I roll onto my left side to see my aunt just sleeping peacefully, despite having rolled off of our mattress. Her hair was spread across the floor, and she was completely wrapped up, cozy in a blanket. Everything was pretty normal until I realized that my aunt was on my right side of the bed, and whoever or whatever this was, it was not my aunt. There was long black hair that was not hers, and it was to her knee that was exposed, mind you, and was kind of weird looking, sort of almost dislocated or something. I suppose it's possible that this thing was not human, but you know how if you kind of get really badly injured or afraid, you either become incapacitated with fear or you're filled with adrenaline? Well, I filled up with adrenaline, and I reached my arm up and grabbed the couch and flipped myself over to the other side. I woke my grandma up, and in doing so, I told her to stay awake, but to stay quiet. And it began to move around the couch, and then it just kind of went back out the window. It was so odd, though, the way it moved. It was really smooth and kind of crouching and crawling almost snake-like. Anyway, I don't know what the hell that thing was, or if I was just hallucinating, or if it was a skinwalker, or what. But I'll never forget that night, and my grandma was a witness to it as well, because she remembers waking up, and she remembers me being terrified. Either way, I hope nothing like that ever happens again, and nowadays, I make sure those windows are shut. I lived in West Germany for 8 years as a child. My father was in the US military and was stationed there twice, once from when I was 2 to 6 years old, and again when I was 8 to 12 years old. This was just before reunification in 1990, and our family and my parents, my younger sister and me, went all over the country exploring and visiting parks and castles, hiking through the woods, and even taking boat rides down the Rhine. The event that I'm sharing happened when I was 8 and my sister was 3. We went on a hiking trail through the Black Forest, not one of those long 2 to 4 day trails. This one was a 1-day loop trail. The trail had rest stops too, and really just a flat place with a few benches and tables, every 5 kilometers or so. We had stopped for a rest, and my parents were sitting and just talking with a Canadian family. My sister was in a stroller, and I was playing in the dirt just off the path. More than anything else, I remember how peaceful everything was. The sound of the breeze through the trees, the way the light filtered down through the canopy. I can't describe just the immeasurable peace that I felt. The absolute stillness of the woods was almost a physical presence. For some reason, I was so overcome with it that I decided to walk into the woods. I don't know how far I walked, but I was lost almost immediately, and I could sort of hear the sound of people talking from the rest stop, but I had no idea which direction it was coming from, filtered through the trees and all. The odd thing, though, is that I wasn't afraid at all. I still felt that immeasurable peace. I don't know how long I walked, but it felt like hours, and then I saw her. I say her because even without identifying sexual characteristics, the presence was overwhelmingly feminine. She was a person, but not. Her skin was like skin, but also a bit like bark, like twisted twigs and branches woven together. Her hair was moss, green and fuzzy and short. No mouth, no nose, and her eyes were huge and oval. She also had a yellowish-orange iris with a tiny black pupil. But they took up most of her face too, and there was no malice in them, just awareness and sadness. She held out her hand, and I took it without hesitating, and it felt a bit like wood, but like a living branch and also flesh. She led me back to the trail about 20 meters away from the rest stop, and I say led, but that's not really it. We kind of moved through the forest without moving, and I still can't wrap my head around it years later. She let go of my hand and put her fingers to her face, as if to make a shushing gesture, and then she was gone. But my parents were just packing up my sister when I walked to the rest stop. I thought that I'd been gone for hours, but it had only been about 20 or 30 minutes. But they had thought that I walked up the trail a bit and then came back. Now, to this day, I'm not sure if what I saw was just a hallucination, a dream, or what, but it feels real. And my parents do remember me disappearing, so I know that much is true. It's weird, but the whole scenario has just left this sort of haunting longing in my heart that I don't understand. This happened to me about 6 or 7 years ago, late at night. I was talking with my friend on Skype while my family was asleep, and I told my friend that I have to go to the toilet and I'll be back soon. I'm the kind of guy who turns on the lights where he goes, and I tell this to make it clear that what I saw was not just a silhouette. I turned on the lights in the hallway, in the kitchen, and in the corridor, and I went to the bathroom. After I was done, I went out from the toilet into the corridor to wash my hands, so I turned to the bathroom, but from the corner of my eye, I noticed something unusual in the kitchen. I turned my head in that direction, and I saw that someone was sitting at the kitchen table and just staring right at me. I stopped, and my heart started to beat very hard and fast because it was a man in a black suit. He looked like maybe 40 years old, and his eyes, especially his iris, was dark, maybe dark brown, but I knew that he was staring at me. But for a moment, I wondered what I was going to ask him. I mean, do I say, "Who the hell are you?" But no sound came out of my throat, and for a while I was just standing there, waiting for something to happen. But the man didn't move, and neither did I. Suddenly, driven by fear, I jumped into the bathroom and locked the door on myself. I washed my hands and my face with cold water, and my whole body was just trembling. I really didn't know what to do, but I just decided that I'll stay in the bathroom, and if this man was able to come into my house, that I guess he could get in the bathroom, so I grabbed something sharp and I waited. I waited for a few minutes before I opened the door again, and this was the hardest part because what I had for defending myself was not much. So I could only really rely on the fact that when I see the man again, that I try to yell to other members of my family to wake up and help me. I opened the door a crack and I quickly looked out to the open corridor and there was nothing. I opened the door wider and looked into the kitchen too and nothing. I was afraid, but I came out from the bathroom and decided to look around the house and check every possible place where the man could hide after that. I checked the storage room, the toilet, the kitchen, and I didn't find anything. Then I checked the front door and all the windows and everything was closed. So there was just no way to get in. I mean, I didn't even find a trace of anyone having broken into our house. From my point of view, the whole event just took about 10 minutes, and I went back to my room and on Skype I told my friend what happened to me. He told me to check the clock to see how long it took, and apparently I was away for more than 1 hour. An hour that I have no idea what happened. It was the summer of 2013 in August, just after my birthday, which was the 12th of that month. At this point, it was the 16th to 17th birthday, I believe, and my older sister, who had moved out of home not long after her 18th birthday, she had some free time from work, so my younger sister and I decided to just stay at her house. She lived at the house with her then girlfriend and her girlfriend's son and daughter. Well, prior to the evening of us staying, my older sister had been telling us about how Jay, the son of the girlfriend, was possibly having some type of sleepwalking, as every night for the last week at 3 a.m. he'd be found standing on his bed with his eyes closed but facing his door. He would have zero recollection of this happening or him doing it when he was asked, and he was intelligent enough to answer these questions at the age of 8. I had at the time told her that it could be paranormal related and that maybe he was being possessed or something, but we had no clue what kind of events my sister and I were in for. So the night went by like any other, and my sister and I played Batman on the PS3 up until about midnight and finally decided to go to bed. We didn't have to go anywhere as we were going to sleep in the living room, so we just got ready. My sister chose to sleep on the floor, so I slept on the couch right next to her, and we were laid out like an L, our heads being close to each other. She dozed off quickly, but I hadn't been able to shake this really odd feeling of just being watched. I had even turned the light on quite a few times to make sure that nothing was there. After many non-eventful attempts to catch whatever was making me feel weird, I finally just fell asleep. A couple of hours had passed, and I was awoken up by a hand pressed against the back of my neck and a head on the side of mine. It was my sister, and I could feel her cheek against mine and tears on her face. She said to me, her voice trembling, "Jordan, something's grabbing my blanket." I froze when I heard that, and my heart was pounding, and honestly, I didn't know what to do. I tried talking, but nothing came out, and she spoke again, and she said, "Jordan, help me, it's grabbing me." And by this point, I could feel her grabbing my hair with her right hand and holding onto my neck with her left. I finally said, "What is it?" as it hadn't been enough yet to get me to panic, just scared the daylights out of me at this point. When finally, she screamed as she was pulled away from me, and I began to yell for my sister as I stood up on the couch. Within a moment, my sister came storming from her room with a baseball bat in hand and flipped the light on, and there was nothing in the room. But my sister was in the middle of the floor at this point. My sister came over to her and consoled her, and I took no time at all to start bawling and told my sister what had happened with my younger sister. Now, my younger sister, she wasn't cruel and she didn't lie at that age. She swore that she wasn't kidding around, and my sister let her stay in her room, and I told her that my back hurt at some point. She had me turn around, and upon further inspection realized that I had some cuts, as in fingernails, on my back, bleeding. Not profusely, but enough to make me bleed, like a road rash blood or something. This wasn't the end, however, as not a week had passed, and at my friend's house, my younger sister, as if something had come over her, she attacked me and bit me and hit me a lot. Hours after my mum had yelled at her and told her to go to her room, and after heading to her room, I just sat in the kitchen. A few minutes had passed and my sister started screaming and my mum called out saying, "Jordan, leave her be." Obviously annoyed by everything that had went on that day, I walked out from the kitchen saying, "I'm right here," and my mum and I bolted up the stairs, and upon making it to the top, we looked to my sister's room and we see what I thought for a moment was a brief shadow figure. We charged into her room and saw her curled up on the bed. I'm now age 22, and to this day I have no idea what was going on back then. If any of you guys have any ideas of what that could have been, I'm all ears. When I was living in New York City, I used to travel quite a bit by car. I found myself in this little town in Delaware called Milford. I had plans down there not too far from there, and I think it was like 45 to an hour away or something. Anyway, I was supposed to leave the day after I actually left, but to avoid getting up early in the morning and leaving, I ended up leaving after work, which was approximately 6 p.m. I think, and taking the drive that night, which lasted a little longer than 5 hours. Since I was only staying here an extremely short amount of time, I got myself a shitty Airbnb, which I use frequently when I travel, so I'm pretty comfortable with the whole premise of the service thing. I messaged the guy right before I left if I could rent his little place that seemed pretty nice from the photos. $100, nothing too fancy. It even had 20 plus 5-star reviews. The guy from the get-go in our conversation was a bit casual, and it took me some back and forth to get the place rented that night after he informed me that his brother would have to drop the key off. He also informed me that there would be quite a few tropical plants, in fucking Delaware, mind you, in the kitchen, and he couldn't relocate them on such short notice. I told him that it wasn't a problem, and I'm just looking for a few hours sleep, and then I'm out of there in the morning, so I'm okay with how it is. So I gas up and drive straight through, and I think I may have stopped for gas once, and I arrive at 11:30 p.m. I'm not sure how many of you are from or are familiar with Milford, but it's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Not much to it at all. This guy's place was in a tiny little gated fence community which had a grand total of 15 houses at most that were duplexes. It was pitch black at 12 a.m. though, so there could have been more, I'm not too sure. So I roll up to the place and grab my few essentials I always travel with, my duffel bag, backpack, jacket and extra jacket, walked up to the door and used the keycode to unlock the lockbox and retrieve a house key with flames on it. Classy, right? I turn the lock with the key, which happens to be the loudest thing that's happening in the surrounding area at that moment. I'm telling you, you could hear a pin drop, it was so silent. You know when you get to a place and you get that gut feeling that maybe you shouldn't be there? That's kind of how I felt after hearing that silence. That something is just off, but you don't really know what it is. This feeling was a really large presence in this house. So I put my stuff down on the recliner in front of me, and yes, lo and behold, an extremely odd amount of tropical plants are in the kitchen. No, it wasn't weed, I'm talking legit palm plants and stuff. I don't know, I'm from New York. I look around this place, which has a pretty decent living room as well as 2 bedrooms, and I go to check them out. So bedroom 1 has fucking dolls from like the 1950s everywhere, a queen-size mattress with no bed frame, and no sheets was laying in the middle of the floor, and he did mention that he did have a son and he didn't use the house that much, but fuck that room, it was creepy. Bedroom number 2, snow globes everywhere, 1 sheet on the bed, no pillows, and I attempt to turn the light on with the only switch in the room, and there's no actual light in the room at all. The switch does nothing. Alright, so fuck this room too, I'll take the couch I guess. At this point, I feel pretty uncomfortable, but I knew I was only there for a night. In any case, I was hungry, so I went to the only thing around that was open anyway, a Food Lion that was closing soon. I grabbed some Supreme Pizza Bites and a peach Snapple, and I just went back. The microwave was the only thing that worked in the kitchen, and I was so off-put by this feeling that I set my GoPro up. I travel with it everywhere I go, and I thought that I might catch something on camera. I get back to my Airbnb and the first thing I do is looked around to make sure everything was in place just where I left it, which it was, so that was a good sign. I get the GoPro and take the SD card out and I pop it into the laptop. I still have the footage somewhere actually, and there was nothing on the footage. At this time it was well past midnight and I'd already worked a full day and completed a good amount of driving on the traffic-packed Jersey Turnpike, and I needed sleep. I planned to sleep on the very small couch, which for a 5'11" guy meant for feet dangled over the edge. The apartment had one small 20-inch TV, which didn't have a power cable, and the outlet by the couch was just far enough away where my phone wouldn't reach while charging, and I wasn't facing away from the door and laying the other way, that's for sure. Which wouldn't have really mattered anyway, because I had a Sprint at the time, and anybody who's had a Sprint knows that you're pretty much out of luck 98% of places. Anyway, I kept the light on because, even though I'm an adult, it gave me some comfort knowing that the light was on. About an hour of laying there and I couldn't sleep, so nature called and I had to use the bathroom, so I got up and sat down in the neon green painted dimly lit bathroom with the shower that had no curtain. This room was also so small to the point where I couldn't fully extend my legs if I wanted to. Now, let me preface all this by saying that the kitchen and the hardwood floors, they were the type where you slide something across it. You emit that screeching noise that we're all familiar with if you drag an item across it. But that sound is going to play a role soon in this story. So, I'm in the bathroom doing my business, just reading a bottle on the John because my phone is charging outside of the bathroom because it was no use to me anyway. I'm sitting there and I hear that fucking chair on the faux hardwood floor screeching across the floor, being pulled across, gently, for about as long as it takes for someone to sit down. To be honest, I almost threw my heart up. This was the biggest oh shit moment of my life. And just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, the sound of fingers rhythmically tapping on the top of the wooden kitchen table, impatiently getting faster, decided to echo ever so slightly into the cramped little bathroom. Frozen, fucking petrified, I literally sit there and repeated to myself 10 to 11 times, I'm fucked. So I sat there for 2 to 3 minutes and debated what to do. At this point, the tapping had actually stopped, but I figured that I couldn't stay in there forever, right? I thought to myself that whoever's out there already knows that I'm here, so pretty much after some debating, I just decided, fuck it. I'm gonna go out there and fight him off and grab the Bowie knife, which was a present from my grandmother that I carry in my backpack when I travel for just this type of situation, I guess. So I crack the door and yell, hello, and there's no answer. No sound. Once again, I yell out. I called the police already, they're on their way. My phone wouldn't have been visible from the kitchen, so I thought that they wouldn't have known that I didn't have my phone. But still, there was silence. I peeped my head from around the corner of the door, and there's nothing. Nobody there. No sign of anybody. Chairs not even moved. I literally did not even bother to check the rest of the place, and I just packed my shit up so quick you would think the place was burning down, and I got in my car and literally drove to my Holiday Inn an hour away at like 3 a.m. and told the front desk guy what just went down. He offered to call the police, and looking back on it, I probably should have, but there was really no evidence that anybody was actually ever in the place with me, and it wasn't like I was ever going back there or anything. Most importantly, I was okay as well, and the guy was super understanding about my situation and let me check into the room that was for like 3 p.m. that day. I even got bumped up to like a king-size bedroom because the room that was reserved for me wasn't even ready at the time. So yeah, I don't know what that sound was, and I don't know if there was actually somebody in the room and maybe they left, or maybe there was some sort of hiding place in that room that I didn't know of. Either way, I know what I heard, and I'm sure that there was something in there. This happened almost a year ago, and it's all thanks to my little shit of a husky. She was a super cute 10-pound fluffball at the time that this happened. I was living in a pet-friendly apartment complex, and I had just bought her. I picked her up at around 10 p.m. that morning and went to visit my parents' house so that they could meet her, and I stayed all day and didn't arrive home until 8 or 8:30 p.m. We walked in and I introduced her to the apartment, played with her and took her to pee, and then I just went to bed. During the night, she woke me up twice to pee and whined a bit since she was new in the environment, but she wasn't too loud and I quickly calmed her down by putting her on my bed and she crawled on my head and fell asleep. Since I read that huskies are very active dogs, I decided to take her on her first walk on the sidewalk beside of the building. As we started our walk, we passed the side of the building that shows the balconies. I lived on the 3rd floor and the guy who lives directly below me was standing on his balcony, filming me on his phone. I felt a bit weird about it, but didn't think too much of it since the landlord has actually told me before that he mentioned to her that he enjoyed me living above because I was quiet. Also, a lot of the tenants in the complex were having a fit over my husky and would just hold her and pet her whenever they saw her, so I thought that he was just filming her to show his friends or to talk about her later with me. I spent the whole day with her and getting her familiar with me and her new home. Night rolls around and I took her out before I went to bed around 11:30. I walked past a red car that was running but didn't have its lights on, so I couldn't see who was in the car. But I didn't think much about it because it wasn't unusual for people to just sit in their cars waiting on someone, and I lived right beside of a college and have had many college students living in the building, so I thought maybe they were just waiting for someone so that they can head off to a party or something. While I didn't think much of it, I was still aware of my surroundings since I was a young woman alone at night. My puppy finally used the bathroom after 20 minutes of sniffing around, and I picked her up and walked past the car to go inside. When I did this, the driver's side suddenly opens and a tall man steps out and yells, "Are you allowed to have that dog?" almost aggressively. I turned around and noticed that it was my neighbor and replied, "Oh yeah, you're allowed to have dogs here." I was confused as to why he was asking that since he's lived here longer than me, but I answered him anyways. He points at my dog and says, "No, you dumb bitch, did you get permission from the landlord to have that thing?" As soon as he cursed me, I clenched the dog closer to my chest and just nodded, still confused and now a bit frightened too. But then he said, "Seriously, I know you're lying, bitch. You didn't have permission. I videotaped you this morning and sent it to the landlord and she said that she had no clue about her." I know he's lying because I did tell her about my dog, but I just hadn't paid the deposit yet since it was the weekend and she was fine with that. So I explained to him, but he just cursed at me more, calling me a lying bitch and how we kept him up all day and night with her running around and stomping. I know that that was impossible because a dog my size can't stomp or make noise to keep him up all night. She hasn't barked or howled once and it just whines a little bit at times, but it's definitely not loud enough to keep him up all night, especially since I was asleep next to her and I slept fine. I finally interrupted and apologized to cut the convo short because he was just getting more angry as it went on. He pauses and then says, "Shut the fuck up. You don't mean that, and I'm calling the landlord tomorrow to report you and your dog. I swear if she keeps me up again tonight, I'll fuck you and her up, bitch." I freeze at that point because I know that he means it too, and even though we never had any problems until that day, I've heard him harassing other neighbors and even pulled out a gun on one over their dogs. However, because he's buddy-buddy with the landlord, as in doing drugs and probably sex too, he's never gotten in trouble for it. But despite being scared, my dumbass suddenly gets pissed off for getting threatened for no reason, and I stammered out, "I have permission to have this dog, so I'll be there with you tomorrow when you try to report me. You're lying and upset because you hate dogs, even though you live in a pet-friendly apartment, which was a stupid move on your part." Yes, I know. I was stupid and the words just vomited out of my mouth. Suddenly, the passenger door slings open though, and a woman steps out and shouts, "Bitch, just go on before we beat your ass. You ain't gonna do shit tomorrow, but get rid of that damn dog." I didn't know that there was someone else in the car as I was standing closer towards the driver's side. My fear completely took over at this point, and I just ran away and into the building. I was on the 2nd floor landing when I hear the lobby door slam and footsteps pounding up the stairs. I let out a scream and hurried up to the third floor, down the hallway and into my apartment, and I locked all the locks and put my door stopper against the doorknob. But from outside my window, closer towards the end of the hall, I hear laughter, and then they walked away. I locked myself in my bedroom and cuddled my puppy as I just cried. I stayed up all night too, afraid that they'd try to break in and kill me and my dog or something. The next day I called my mum to pick me up and didn't come back until 2 weeks later when I moved out. I brought all of my male cousins for extra protection that day too, and in the end I had to move in back with my parents because I'm afraid to be out on my own now. But I ended up getting my deposit and last month's rent back, so that was good. I never reported the couple though because I didn't know their names and, well, I just didn't want to get involved with them anymore anyway. Plus, I felt discouraged too because my landlord practically took his side and just rushed the process for me to leave by quickly giving me my money back if I didn't involve her boss or the police. After that day, I learned that she wasn't the landlord but merely the apartment manager too. Looking back, I wondered if I could have sued or something, but either way, I'm kind of glad that I'm out of there now. The following account occurred roughly the summer of 2012. It's always been difficult for me to talk about this, but I've found writing about it to be therapeutic. So, I was 17 at the time and I had just gotten my first job. I lived in rural Western Virginia in a small mountain community. My mum's friend owned a camping resort not far from my house that had a general store, and she said that she'd pay me to help me out in the store during the busy months in the summer. It was a pretty easy job, and I met a lot of our out-of-towners, which was nice because our community could get so isolated. Most of us just lived pretty far away from each other. One day, a big burly mountain man type guy came into the store. He was in his late 40s, early 50s, probably 6.5 foot and about 280 pounds. He looked dirty, like he worked outside a lot. His clothes were sort of tattered and he had a long beard too. But we had a few of the woodsy hermit types in the area, and he definitely fit the profile. He bought some basic items, one of which was one of our homemade bars of soap. When he came to the register, he looked me up and down carefully, and he didn't talk for a minute, just kind of stared at me. His people skills clearly needed work. "Hey, did you make this soap?" he asked gruffly. Possibly," I said. "I help out with that sometimes." "You make a lot of your own stuff? Toiletries and things like that, yeah?" "I like that," he said, nodding to himself. I honestly didn't know how to respond, and so I quickly rang up his items and he paid with crumpled money, and right before he left, he asked, "Hey, you cook too?" "Sometimes," I replied. "Huh, bet the boys around here are itching to marry you," he said as he smiled to himself. I said nothing, and I was puzzled as to what I said that stood out as wife material. I told Krista, Mum's friend's boss, about the bizarre encounter, and she laughed it off, and so did my family and friends. But then, Mountain Man started turning up more often. We chatted a little bit here and there, and I found out that he had a cabin in the woods, and he claimed he built it with his bare hands. He said that he hunted and lived off the land, other than the things that he bought in the store. Over time, our chat escalated, with him making comments about how nice it would be to have a woman like me around who would make those things and cook his kills. But one time, he even said I had the birth-in hips that men lust after. That was creepy. He even started inviting me to fish with him, hunt with him, and see his place and all that. And I always politely declined. But he got more and more insistent, and I told Krista about how uncomfortable he was starting to make me. The intensity with which he said those things just really began to scare me. So she said that when he came in to go and get her, and she would ring him up. But thanks to her, I started speaking to him less, and I thought I wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. But one night, I was closing up, and it was late, around 10 at night. Krista had left about an hour before, and I was leaving by myself. The only two cars in front of the store were an old blue pickup and mine. and I was immediately alarmed because I knew Mountain Man drove a blue pickup. But I didn't see him in the lot, just his car, so I walked quickly to my car and checked the back seat before I started her up. But then, when I first turned the key into the ignition, I got nothing but sputters. I tried several more times and got scared quickly. Of all nights, why is this happening tonight? I remember asking myself angrily. And just as I was reaching for my phone to call for help, there was a loud pounding on the driver's side window. To be honest, I'm shocked that I didn't piss myself. I didn't even want to look because I knew that it was going to be him, but I did and my suspicions were confirmed. He smiles a big grin at me, showing me exactly which teeth are missing. "Hey, need some help?" he said loudly through the window. I shook my head furiously. No, it's okay, my dad's on the way," I said, hoping to scare him off. I hadn't spoken to my dad in years, mind you, and Mountain Man laughed at this. "No, he's not," he said. "Listen, just open the door, okay?" The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up at this. I mean, how did he know that I was bluffing? "No," I said firmly. "Just leave me alone, okay?" And suddenly, he looked angry. He pulled the handle, but I had locked all the doors when I first got in. He kept furiously pulling the handle, though, and started pounding on the window. I told him to leave now or I'm calling the cops, and I screamed that at him. He clearly wasn't getting the message, though, so I pulled out my phone and called 911. I must have sounded hysterical to the dispatcher, and I knew that she could hear him pounding. She said that she would have officers out ASAP, but out here that could be a while. I screamed at Mountain Man that the cops are on their way, leave now, who didn't seem to let it deter him. But after a few more minutes of pounding, he just suddenly stopped and walked back to his truck. I watched him go, and hopefully he would just leave me alone now. But then, he started walking back toward me with a fucking crowbar in his hand. I screamed at him, "No, get the fuck away from me," and he started swinging at the driver's side window with the crowbar. I ducked down into the passenger seat on the floor and covered the back of my head like they teach you in the tornado drills. I heard the sickening crack of the window, but not for long. And suddenly, I heard male voices shouting, telling Mountain Man to get away from the car. I sat up and saw two men approaching, one with a shotgun pointed at Mountain Man. I recognized them as a couple of guests staying at the resort for a camping trip, and I breathed a deep sigh of relief and got out of the car, telling them that the police were on their way. I thanked them profusely as we waited for the police, and surprisingly, Mountain Man didn't make any moves to get away. But the cops came pretty quickly after that, so he didn't have much of a chance anyway. They took him away, and I gave them my statement, and I was pretty shaken up for a while afterwards. A few weeks later, I finally got the scoop on the man, and apparently he had a real bad history of mental illness. He'd been in and out of state institutions and really had been living in an old cabin in the woods where he wasn't taking his meds and his issues were only getting worse. My cousin Luke is a cop, and later on he told me some more about the case that he had heard about through some other officers or something. The police did a search of the cabin after the incident to see if there was anything that might have been of interest to them, and they found a journal that Mountain Man kept. Apparently, in it, he said that he was lonely and wanted a wife. He actually mentioned me by name a lot too, and Luke said that there were a lot of lewd things in there about me that he didn't want to share, but tried to put it simply by saying that Mountain Man had a detailed plan to abduct me, starting with the sabotaging of my car engine to get me into a vulnerable position. When Luke said that, I nearly burst into tears thinking about how horrible that night could have gone if those two men hadn't have come along. Thankfully, he's been put back into an institution, and with any luck, he'll stay there for good this time. A year and a half ago, I moved out of my family home and across the state. I've believed in the paranormal since I was very young, and I was raised on Appalachian folklore and the ghost stories of extended family members that had no reason to lie to me about that sort of thing, so I believe them, and I believe too. But I'm absolutely a chicken at heart, and spooky things frighten me very easily when I'm alone. But I know that about myself, so I ignore any weird things that I get or things that I hear and see unless someone else can verify them. I'm really good at shaking things off, in other words. Growing up, I once saw shadow men in my bedroom doorway, and no features, just 6-ish feet tall and shadows. I was obviously petrified, but it was probably just sleep paralysis. I always felt someone watching me when I would do the dishes at night when no one else was up. Probably just paranoid because it's dark and the nearest wall is 20 feet behind me. I felt someone shake my shoulder as I was falling asleep once, but probably just phantom touch. In other words, I just wrote everything off to the point that when I heard my brother behind me ask clearly, "Max, what are you doing?" only to turn around and face an empty room, I thought he was just pranking me. I thought that he had silently opened the door, asked me a question, and quickly silently closed the door before I could turn around. I wrote it off enough that I was mad at him when I searched the house and backyard for 20 minutes, thinking that he was hiding somewhere. Wrote it off enough that it somehow made sense that he had decided to leave the house entirely just to avoid me being mad at him for messing with me. Wrote it off enough that when I asked my mum if she had seen him leave and she told me that he left 3 hours ago, that I decided it must have just been my imagination. Just a very powerful auditory hallucination. And so I shook it all off. Recently, though, I went back to my family's house to celebrate the holidays with them. A Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthday fun for the whole family deal, and I stayed in my old bedroom. And weird does not begin to cover how the atmosphere felt. It was oppressive and angry and possessive in a way that felt intensely familiar and made me aware of just how much my new home doesn't feel anything at all. But it also felt excited to see me, if that makes any sense. I felt paranoid and scared the whole week that I was there, and I just couldn't shake the feeling. And obviously, I'm pretty good at shaking things off at this point. My immediate family all think that I just have too active of an imagination, but I really don't know if I agree anymore. Either way, I'm really glad that I don't have to go back anytime soon, because all those experiences, I'm not so sure that I can just shake them off anymore. So this actually happened when I was a bit older. I was 17 at the time, and I had a crappy little Android phone that came from Walmart. You would buy a card for it and activate a code to get service every month too. Me though, I never really texted or called people much. I didn't go out a lot or anything either, so I also didn't really need data. I just wanted a phone so that I could connect to my Wi-Fi at home and go on social media and such, because I didn't have a computer at the time. So I didn't usually worry about getting the monthly service. But because of this, I often got calls from random people trying to sell me more phone services too. Of course, I always ignored every phone call and text that I got, thinking that it was more people trying to sell me services because I hadn't given out my number to anyone. But one day, I got like 3 calls in a row from the same number, and they left some sort of voicemail that I deleted. I ignored it, thinking that it was once again someone trying to sell me stuff, but this time was different. The next day, I received multiple calls from the same number again, and even a few texts this time. The first text I got said something like, "If you don't return my calls by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, I'm contacting the authorities." Obviously, I was very confused, but I just assumed it was someone who had the wrong number or something. The only thing was, because I didn't have service, I couldn't text them back to tell them this. And the next decision I made in this situation, I find just so incredibly stupid looking back on it. But I was still a teenager, and I guess I just didn't think that this would lead to another traumatizing internet stalking experience that would haunt me for quite a few years of my life. So, what I decided to do was I messaged my friend some screenshots of the text over Snapchat and explained to her what was going on. We talked about how strange the texts this person sent were for a minute, and then I asked her if she could tell this person they had the wrong number. My best friend, being just as confused and just as passive about the strange text as I was, said, "Yeah, sure." And then she told me a couple of minutes later that she had texted the person. We both joked a bit about it, trying to guess what the person might have wanted. We guessed some pretty funny stuff too. I think at one point, one of us even suggested it might have been somebody's baby mama looking for child support or something. It was all fun and games until I got a text from the number saying, "Who the fuck is this?" And after that, I wasn't laughing anymore. I later found out that my best friend, being about as bright as a lamp that's not turned on, had indeed texted this person that they had the wrong number, but when they asked, "Who is this?" she proceeded to tell them her name. Before I even had time to text my friend to ask her how this person knew her name though, I got a call from the number again. Terrified from not knowing at the time how this person knew my friend's name, I stupidly answered the call. I said hello nervously into the phone, and a woman with an unfamiliar voice responded saying that she was with the law enforcement and that she was looking for someone with a particular name. I was sure that I didn't know anyone by that name and told her that she had the wrong number. She said, "Are you sure? You better not be lying to me. I have your address written down and I can contact the police department." At this point, I was pretty scared because how did this woman know my address? My asthma started kicking in as I got more and more scared too. I stayed silent for a minute to compose myself and I finally said, "Ma'am, I'm only 17 years old. I don't know who you're looking for, but I haven't done anything wrong." Before the woman had time to respond though, my mum burst into my room and asked me who I was talking to and if I was okay. I looked up at my mum almost in tears and told the woman that she could take this issue up with my mother and handed my mum the phone telling her that it was a woman that was from law enforcement or something. My mum, knowing that I don't easily get scared like that, and knowing that I hadn't done anything wrong, immediately says to the woman, "Look lady, I don't know who you are, but you have the wrong number. My daughter hasn't done anything wrong." They talked on the phone for a few minutes and finally my mum said goodbye and hung up the phone. She then told me that the woman said that she was just looking for a brother and that she wouldn't be calling my phone anymore and that I shouldn't answer phone calls from strangers. After I explained everything to my mum, I noticed that I had a bunch of messages on Snapchat from my friend. She said that the woman had left her a bunch of aggressive voicemails saying that if she didn't answer, that she could get in trouble for keeping information from an officer and that she needed to help her with some documents or something. I told my friend about how the lady changed her story when she was on the phone with my mum and told her to block the number, and she said that she already did. Thinking it was over, we talked about it for a while and just started joking again, and the rest of the day was completely normal, and eventually we just went to bed. The next morning, I had pretty much forgotten about the phone call and was checking all of my social media as usual. I was messaging some of my friends on Facebook Messenger when a notification popped up saying, "Session expired, please log in again." This usually happened when Messenger updated, so I wasn't too worried about it, and I tried to log in a million times and figured that I'd just forgotten my password or something. I clicked the password link and checked the email option and noticed I had an unfamiliar email. Figuring that it was just one of my aliases I had forgotten about because I had made up lots of different accounts and names to keep my previous stalkers from finding me, I moved on to the phone number option. And that's when I saw it. The number linked to my account, it wasn't mine. It was the number of the woman who had called me the day before, in fact. Obviously, I went into absolute panic. I mean, how did this woman get enough information on me to hack my Facebook from one phone call? I tried contacting Facebook and all the usual stuff to try and get back into my account. I eventually gave up, in fact, and made a new one figuring that it might be for the best and went on with my day. A few nights later, the Wi-Fi went down though. I tried everything to get it back up because I was in the middle of a serious life or death discussion about teenage drama with my friend when it went out. Nothing was working though, and I ended up having to go to my friend's house across the street and borrow her phone to call the internet provider. I eventually found out that the Wi-Fi password had been changed and no one in my family had changed it. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but after that, my phone started going nuts too. It'd just turn on by itself, apps would open up, I'd leave it on the table in another room and I'd come back to find my gallery flooded with pictures of my ceiling. One time, there was even a selfie perspective picture that I didn't remember taking of me looking at something on my phone. But I knew these types of situations all too well, and Obviously, someone had hacked my phone to stalk my phone activity and get information. I never did figure out who the woman was, or if this was even the same person, or why whoever was doing this was doing it, but I got a new phone and created all new accounts for everything, and all the weird stuff that was happening just stopped all of a sudden. I don't know what would have happened if the person had kept going and how much information they actually have on me still, but these days, I never answer phone calls from numbers that I don't know. A few months ago, I experienced one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. It's taken me a while to come around to writing this, but I feel it might help people to know you just can't trust everyone. So, me and two of my friends, Dee and Sarah, we went to meet Dee's boyfriend, whom she met on Tinder. We didn't think much of it because Dee has met him face to face before and he lived about 30 minutes from our town, so we saw no problem with it. We went to the mall and hung out, and her boyfriend Jaden, he was actually a pretty cool guy, we got along really well and I could see us being friends. Or so I thought, that is. About a week after us meeting, me, the same two girls, and my boyfriend, Peter, and I went to go see Jaden again. This time our intention was to get drunk and spend the night at his apartment too. When we got there, everything was going great and the boys got along really well and us girls had been friends for a while, so it was perfect. We walked to the store to buy the gin and upon getting back to the apartment, we immediately opened bottle number 1. Me, Dee, Sarah and Peter aren't really drinkers, but Jaden insisted that he get us drunk because Sarah had never drunk before. Jaden was quite the drinker, but didn't want to drink, which was okay because we would never force anyone to do that. We made it halfway through the first bottle with good conversations and jokes and great memories being made. Until Jaden decided to start drinking too. He chugged half the bottle of gin on his own, which me and my friends were pretty shocked by, to say the least. He even began on the second bottle by himself too. By the time that he had finished half of the second bottle, Peter had fallen asleep and so did Dee, so it was just me, Sarah and Jaden hanging out super drunk. Peter passed out on the couch in Dee and Jaden's room, and me and my friend remained on Jaden's couch carrying out pointless drunk conversations until it turned for the worse. Jaden began a story saying how me and Sarah are best friends with Dee, and we corrected him saying that we're close friends but not best friends. Jaden's face stiffened at this comment before he let out a cackled laugh that wrenched my stomach. He said that he had a twin brother that would be mad if we said anything about Dee, but up until this time, he never mentioned having a brother at all. Me and Sarah shot confused looks at each other, but felt nothing was wrong and that maybe he was just too drunk. After that, he insisted that he make us a cot on the floor to sleep on, but we were much too uncomfortable to sleep at this point. So, upon our denial, he decided that he wanted to continue conversation. He asked me about 10 times if my boyfriend's name was truly Peter, in which I insisted it was. He then drunkenly asked me if I would swear that upon a silver blade. At this point, I just knew something wasn't quite right. He rose from the couch, walking to the kitchen, and me and my friend nervously walked a few paces behind him, and with everything in me, I couldn't tell you why we followed him. He began shifting through the knife drawer, finding nothing, and he then turned towards me and my friend, laughing, and said, "I can't kill myself in front of you, right?" At this time, I scanned his bare chest, seeing what looked like several scars from being stabbed, and I knew that this wasn't a twisted joke at this point. I got between him and Sarah, nervous of what he would do, and just then he reached for the butcher's block on his counter, and everything got worse. He pulled out the first handle his hand fell to, and luckily it was the knife sharpener. My eyes flashed over to the block quickly, and there was one more handle, and I knew for a fact that I couldn't be this lucky again. I quickly grabbed the second handle, which turned out to be a butcher's knife, and told him calmly that he wouldn't want this one, it was dirty, and tossed it in the sink. And I thank God every day that I reacted like that. But of course, it didn't end there. So me and him were standing toe to toe, his face hovering inches above mine. He held out his arm, showing me a big black tattoo, and he said that he got it years ago and it was a demon that shared my name. I told him that I wasn't that demon because I was frightened and felt no reason to antagonize the situation any further. And then he brought his face closer to mine and said the words that will never leave my mind for as long as I live. He said, "Can I choke you and rip your organs out?" I looked over to Sarah and Dee, who had emerged from the room at some point during this conversation, and chuckled. I told him, theoretically speaking, that he could, but I'd rather him not. He then wrapped his hand around my throat, aiding more pressure than I could possibly be comfortable with, and he let go and repeated his question a bit louder and more aggressive this time. I knew at this point that he wasn't joking anymore, and I was terrified. I told him that I don't see why he would, as I give him no motive, and just as the words spilled from my mouth, he gripped my throat and shoved me against the wall. My head hit the wall hard, causing his 2 female roommates to run out of a nearby room. I was calmly looking around, and his hand was on my throat, and he was dragging me closer and closer to the sink, which I could only think would be to grab a knife. I was frozen with fear, and Dee tackled him off me, and my boyfriend woke up at this point. Sarah was in full panic, screaming that we needed to leave now. We quickly grabbed our stuff and ran to the car as fast as we could, but then I realized that we just left Dee and the other 2 girls there with him, so I darted to the window to see what was happening. Jaden had his roommate pressed to the sink, and I began screaming and banging on the window. He looked up and she tackled him to the ground, and as soon as I knew that they were away from the knives, I ran back to the apartment where the girl was still fighting him, and they were biting and kneeing each other to no avail. My boyfriend tackled him to the couch, and Jaden was screaming, kill me, demons." And that's when my boyfriend knew that he wasn't mentally okay. My boyfriend held him down and told him that it's okay and showed him love, which seemed to calm him a bit, but only for about 5 minutes. At the end of the calmness, he let out a blood-curdling scream and began biting my boyfriend's leg, and everyone was hitting him, trying to remove him before he removed a piece of my boyfriend. He was grinding his teeth against my boyfriend's flesh, and as soon as he let go, my boyfriend slid away from him. Jaden sat up against the wall and started laughing like a fucking maniac, and then he immediately began puking blood and screaming for us to get away. We all took a step back, and he just started screaming at his roommate, calling her a whore and a demon. This started another full-on brawl between them too. Sarah was begging us to leave, but Dee refused to leave her side. And so we just left without Dee and just ran for it. Dee was okay in the end, and Jaden went to jail for domestic battery because apparently someone conveniently called in a noise complaint to the cops. He got 6 months in jail, and the cops know nothing about me or my boyfriend being there. To this day, I can't help but think about what would have happened if Dee hadn't have woken up, or if we would have just gone to sleep. But to this day too, I still have the actual scars from where he tore pieces of my neck away with his fingernails. It haunted me for a while, thinking that he would surely have come to finish what he started, but he hasn't, and we haven't seen the guy since. And who knows if he ever will. Okay, so this just happened last night, and it's just kept me awake all night, and I can't stop thinking about it, so let me just share it. So, we've only been living here for a little over 3 months, and my window is the only window out of our entire house that has a view of the backyard, and it's also right next to our squeaky back door, meaning that I always hear when someone comes in and comes out. So, my family went out to run errands last night, leaving me home alone trying to catch up on my classes because, college life and all. And well, it was going pretty good for the first hour until I hear the back gate open and shut, and at first I thought, oh, hey, they must be back, thinking that my family had just come home, but that thought was immediately gone when I remembered that we have a front door and there is no reason for them to come in through the back. So I sit as still as I possibly can and listen. I start to hear the sound of crunching leaves too, like someone is stepping on them, but I can also hear that they're trying to move slowly. And at this point, they're right under my window, and I know this because we have a couch located right underneath it, and I hear someone actually sit on it and let out a quick grunt, which also let me find out that it was a man who was doing this. And I'm also feeling extremely grateful over my paranoia of having my blinds open at this point. I am completely freaking out now, not even able to move at all because there's literally someone sitting under my window and I just sit there motionless for like 2 minutes until I start to hear a tapping. He was tapping on my damn window. He started out like light taps at first, and with each set of taps he added more weight to them, and I feel my eyes grow even wider and immediately feel like I'm going to pass out, and I still can't move. It's like I'm paralyzed with fear, and it just keeps going on, tapping and tapping, until finally I snap out of it, and immediately without shoes and in just sort of shorts and a tank top, I jump up and grab my keys and run out of the front door into a 30-degree weather night, which, in my defense, was definitely not the smartest thing to do, as who knows if he was alone. Someone could have been in the front, but at that moment I just didn't care. I didn't even feel cold, as I just needed to get out of there. I hopped into my car and drove off and parked at a Walmart nearby and sat there in shock, not even believing that had actually happened. I finally picked up my phone and see my hands are shaking really bad, but I managed to call my parents, and as soon as I hear my dad's voice, I burst out crying, not even being able to tell him until he just finally said that he was on his way, and not even 5 minutes later, they were there in the parking lot, where I finally calmed down enough and told him what had happened, and we went back home. I was terrified to go back, and even waited in the car until my dad came back from the backyard after inspecting it, and said that whoever it was, that they were gone now. We also debated about calling the police, but I honestly didn't think anything would come of it. We would just file a report since I didn't even see his face at all, and he was probably long gone by now, but now I'm really regretting it because I'm still terrified and I don't feel safe in my own house anymore. I've been trying to distract myself all day now, but I'm just so shaken up and just hoping that I can forget about this whole incident soon. When I was 12, my parents left for town for a second honeymoon at Niagara Falls. They left my brother, who was 17, in charge of me, and my 10-year-old sister too. A few days after my parents left, my brother told me that my sister was sleeping over at a friend's house and that he was getting drunk and hired his buddy's place. Told me not to set the house on fire or rip off my testicles and that I'd have the house to myself. A few hours after my brother left, my Saint Bernard started barking his head off at the woods by my house. I thought that there was just a bear or a wild dog nearby, and my dog wanted to fight it as he was quite aggressive towards strangers in his territory. I ignored him, but after 30-ish minutes I just got sick of the barking and went downstairs to lock him into the parents' room, but as I went to go into the living room to grab him, I saw a man looking straight at my dog through the glass door, and he was trying to pick the lock open. I freaked out and told them to fuck off, barely managing to wrangle my dog into my room. Called the police and then my parents, and the police came by like 25 minutes later and basically told me that they picked up a guy trying to break into a parked car, and they wanted me to see if this was the guy who tried to break in, as this idiot didn't wear a ski mask for either crimes. Sure enough, it was him, and he also confessed to being the culprit behind other burglaries around town, and also ratted out his meth and cooking selling partners. I'm glad that my dog was down there that day, because if he had got in the house and without me knowing, I don't know what would have happened. Either way, I'm sure that this guy is out of prison now and hopefully far away from me. I worked as an overnight security officer and had just gotten off my shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The building I patrolled was massive and completely dark at night. It was the middle of winter, and I'd spent all night checking the temperatures of the risers and investigating the semi-trucks that tried to park on the property without clearance. I really enjoyed this job, despite being told that I wasn't tough enough. 22-year-old woman and under 110 pounds. It was so silent that my ears would ring, and after my final tour, I waited in dispatch watching the cameras and listening to music. It was still dark outside when the relieving officer came in, and I had a long drive home ahead of me. After scraping off my car and mentally prepping myself for the drive, I was on the highway in about 10 minutes. I figured it would be an easy drive home as the cars were few and far in between, and I was 20 miles from home when I noticed a car speeding up behind me. I was already going over the limit by about 5 or 7, no rush because it had just been me, and they got into the fast lane and stayed tandem with my car. Speed up, guy, I thought to myself, and then he jerked his car towards mine, nearly hitting it, and sped up in front of me, braking hard. I laid on the horn and let off the brakes, trying to not get caught on the snowy edge of the road, and I slowed down and figured that I'd let him get ahead of me a bit just to be safe. He obviously didn't care about ramming into my car and endangering both of us, so passing him probably wasn't the best option, right? I plugged my phone in and waited for it to turn on in case I needed to call him in, and the safety barrier between us was getting smaller and smaller at this point. This asshole had slowed down to match me and then gotten into the fast lane beside me again, and I took my chance and sped up at this point, flooring it ahead of him as we swerved like a madman into my lane, just missing my bumper. I chanced to look at my phone and it was still black, and I got into the earliest lane that I could for an exit into town. He gunned it to 85 behind me, trying to ram me again, and I swerved and regained control, just to have him slam on his brakes right in front of me again. I was going to lead this guy right to the police station. I was coming off the exit to a red light, and there were cars now, but he just disregarded them and stopped in front of me again. I had the PD on the phone and was giving them his plates, my plates, and everything, down to the description of the back of his head. I pleaded in my head for the light to turn green, and he was driving a beat-up Subaru, and I saw him scrambling for something crazily, and I unlocked my glove compartment where I keep my gun. I'd never want to have to use it, and thankfully to this day I've never had to, but it was troubling to say the least. I told the dispatcher that we were driving alongside the station, and she told me that there was a unit about a quarter mile away. She told me to remain on the phone with her and to not pull over. I continued my drive, although much slower now, and he zigzagged on the white line to prevent me from changing lanes. Just then, I saw blue lights behind me and I heard a siren, and I asked the dispatcher if I should pull over as well to give a statement, but she said that it would be best not to. He pulled over reluctantly and parked crookedly in the shoulder, and I never heard how it played out, but I sure hope that the police did the right thing. I don't know what the guy was up to and why he was just so enraged at me, or what he was trying to achieve by swerving all over the road like that, but to be on a dark highway like that, pretty much all alone with nothing around and nobody to help you and pretty much at the mercy of the highway, it was pretty scary to say the least. So when I was 5, my mum decided to leave my dad. She took me and my sister to a new house just outside of our village. Our house was a road just off the country lanes, a row of 5 terrace houses, and behind them was a large orchard that hid a few rundown barns. It was actually a pretty nice house, and from what I can remember, we actually had some pretty good times there. After a couple of months or so, though, we began to notice some weird things happening. One day, my mum, unemployed at the time, was cleaning the house and saw a man walking his dog around the houses. She took no notice until she realized that he was doing it at least 5 times every day whilst looking at the house and through the windows. We began to joke about it too and took little notice, as to us he was very clearly a stay-at-home nosy kind of guy. That was, until one day my older sister, Amy, was out there with her friends. They began to notice the guy was following them home, and scared they began to walk faster, and suddenly the guy goes into a full sprint, chasing them to our house, and after that it got a lot worse too. Our living room was right by the back door, and every night at 8 p.m. we'd hear this creaking sound. It wasn't until one night that my mum looked over and saw the handle to the back door slowly turning that we actually noticed what was going on. Luckily enough, we locked it every time we shut it, but we then began to notice that the house wasn't as empty as we thought. You know when you come home and you just know that the house has been empty all day and you're the only person there? Well, my mum and my sisters would come home, and every day they would say that they just knew that we weren't alone. Doors would be left open, things would be moved, our dog would be in a state, and the neighbours complained that he was barking a lot. He was a scrappy little dog, a Jack Russell in fact, but he was quite content when left alone. But due to there not being much evidence and nothing taken, for some reason my mum just never called the police. I guess she just blamed my sisters and tried not to think about it. Denial's a bitch, right? So, one night, however, my mum was awoken in the night to something moving in her room. To clarify, her brother had died 3 years prior to this, and my mum, since, has been very spiritual. So she believed that it was him watching over her. But she swore till this day, whatever was in that room she knew was bad. It wasn't her brother, and whether or not it was this guy, we don't know. But since then, my mum began to be extra careful with locking up the house and even telling the neighbours to keep an eye out. But it didn't seem to help at all. On my 6th birthday, we had a party, and being a pretty greedy kid, I ate too much and threw up, so my mum put me into bed. I shared a bunk bed with my other sister, Megan, and I was on the bottom and she was on the top. I laid with my head by the door and Mum leaving it open so the hallway light came in, as I was scared of the dark, and from where I could see, the loft door sat on the ceiling of the hallway. Disorientated and ill, I woke up a bit and looked up, and looking back, and it terrifies me to this day, and the image stays in my mind forever, but that guy was staring at me from the attic door. Thinking I was dreaming at the time, I mentioned it to my mum and she played it off. That was until she was cleaning the house one day. After coming back upstairs to vacuum, she saw footprints on the wall leading to the attic. She remembered what I had said and asked her friend Susan to help her look up there. And what she found disturbed and scared all of us. There was a filthy mattress squished in the corner of the attic, newspaper clippings all over the floor with tins and bottles. The guy had been sleeping in our attic and coming down in the night and watching us sleep and walking through our house and getting stuff. He'd been pulling himself up into our attic, leaving footprints on the walls as he climbed up. Obviously, police were called, but not much could be done as we had no idea who this guy was. All we could remember was that he was bald, skinny, gaunt, and fucking terrifying. If you've ever seen the film Creep, the one where she's stuck in the underground trying to escape this cannibal deformed guy, he was basically like that. But one day though, me and my sisters and Susan's children, Mike and Holly, were walking through the orchard together, and my mum was cleaning the windows. She cleaned a lot, as you can tell, and she saw us and we waved over to her, and then she suddenly began banging on the window, mouthing the words "run." We darted to the house scared and confused, and it wasn't until I was 10 that my mum told me why she did that. Apparently, when she was washing the windows, she saw the man crawling on his hands and knees towards us through the orchard. He was allegedly about a tree away from me before we began running. God knows what would have happened if he had caught us. But another night, we were about to find out. So my sister Amy decided to have a sleepover with 2 friends, and Holly and Mike came because he and my other sister Megan were friends too. Me, Megan and Mike were asleep, and Mum was downstairs working, and my sister Amy and Holly and her friends were still up. My mum heard a tapping at the back window, and confused as our dog was in and it wasn't windy, we walked over, and upon opening the blinds, she saw him. He was stood at the window with a knife, and my mum said that there was a moment where they both looked at the back door, and the first time my mum had forgotten to lock it, and luckily as they both ran for it, he fell over on the deck chairs. Mum gathered us all in the bedroom, and till this day I remember the screaming and everyone running around. I remember looking down at the door and hearing him scream, "Let me in, I'm going to fucking kill you." I remember thinking that door wasn't going to hold. But the house was nice, but it was really old, and those doors weren't so strong. My mum barricaded the door though and rang the police, and then her friend Susan. Now, the police down our way are pretty useless. For instance, Susan was the first one to show up, and she lived like 6-minute drive away. And so we let her in, and my mum and her decided that they had no time to wait, and we get into groups. Susan takes me, Mike and Megan in her car, and my mum takes Amy, Holly and the girls in her car. We prepared and all stood at the door ready to run, and once out we sprinted to our cars. Susan was parked across the road, and as we buckled ourselves in, we heard screaming from my mum's car. My mum suddenly takes off and leaves. Thanks, Mum. We followed after, confused, and our mum then told us that after they'd gotten into the car, the girls began screaming. My mum turned to her window after looking at the girls, and he was just stood there, face against the window trying to open the car door. And that was the last time that I ever saw that house again. But it didn't end there, and to cut a long story short, my mum went back to pack up, and he was there again. My mum's friend caught him in his car watching the house and called the police, who followed him to the gypsy site across the road from the orchard. Turns out that he apparently lived there all along. It wasn't until about 7 years ago that my mum told me that she heard that he was caught by the cops with stacks of child pornography in his house and was arrested for the attempted kidnap of an 8-year-old girl. Apparently, him tormenting us for nearly 6 months wasn't a warning sign, as no action was taken for that. The fucking police. Anyway, we figured out that he'd been getting in via the attics of the other houses, as they all share an attic. So, someone must have been leaving their windows open and allowing him to climb through and into our attic. Luckily, we never had any more encounters once we moved away. I'm now 22 and I'm living in a completely new town, and I've never seen or heard from him again. But every time I go home and we drive past that gypsy site, abandoned and run down, and it still sends chills right up my spine. One time I went to the bar with my friends. I just turned 21, so I haven't been to many bars up to that point. My friend was drinking on the way to the bar, so he was already pretty drunk when we got there. When I sat at the bar, a cute girl came up and talked to me and my friend. She said that her name was Candace, and I noticed that she had really bright red hair. I assumed that she dyed it, and it was pretty, but unnatural. So this girl was flirting with me and my friend. She could tell my friend was already very drunk. To be honest, I played along like I was drunk already too, since it seemed to be working for my friend. I didn't know if she was just trying to get free drinks, so I told her that we didn't have much money. She offered to buy us drinks, and she kept buying us drinks, and I started to get confused as to who she liked between me and my friend. My friend went to the bathroom, and before he came back, he was kicked out by the bouncers. He was too drunk, and Candace and I went outside with him. She kept telling him to go home with her, and he was so out of it that he could barely answer her. I told her that he was too drunk and that I couldn't let him go anywhere. I didn't want him to wake up hungover in some random house with no car and no idea what happened. Candace kept pushing it though, saying that she would take care of him, but I told her no because I had to stay with him. I was more sober than him, and he was my responsibility. I told her the only way that he was going anywhere was if I tagged along. I assumed that she thought that I was jealous or cock-blocking, but my friend could barely stand, to be honest, and lost interest in Candace already at that point. She immediately started flirting with me then and offered to get my friend a taxi to drive him home and said that we could go to her place alone. At this point, I had a few drinks and I was pretty buzzed, so I agreed. We took my friend to the taxi and walked to her car, and I slightly stumbled on the way to her car. She said, "Wow, you're pretty drunk, huh?" as she was smiling and held onto my arm, and I said, "Yeah." I don't know why, but I just felt slightly shy and anxious. Everything was just happening too easy for me, so I felt really uneasy about the whole thing. We got into her car though, and we drove down the street, and she said, "Want to stop at the liquor store and get some more to drink? I'll buy it, so don't worry about paying," and she offered. I didn't want to drink any more than I already had, and I was already pretty buzzed and wanted to be able to carry myself throughout the rest of the night. Sometimes I made myself look stupid when I'm drunk, so I didn't want to ruin anything with Candace more than I already did earlier with telling her my friend was too drunk. I told her that I was already drunk enough, but she insisted. I didn't want to seem lame, so I told her to get me a pint of liquor with some apple juice to chase it. She went into the store and came out with a lot more than just a pint, mind you, and I assumed that she just wanted to drink more also, and that's why she got a fifth instead of a pint. On the car ride, we passed the bottle back and forth, but she took tiny sips. I tried to take tiny sips too, but She kept passing me the bottle and telling me to drink. I somehow managed to drink all of my apple juice and pretended to drink the bottle by spitting the liquor in the apple juice bottle. I tossed the apple juice bottle full of liquor out the window before she saw it too. I didn't want her to know that I was acting drunker than I was, and she actually believed that I was sloppy drunk when I was simply buzzed. I took a couple of more sips of liquor and finished the bottle, and throughout the car ride I called her the wrong name a couple of times to get a reaction out of her. She didn't react to it though. She just kept letting me call her Carla without correcting me. For some reason I thought she lied to me about her name initially. We drove up to her house and I pretended to trip and stumble into her front door. She helped me walk inside by holding me up, and she opened her front door, which was unlocked, and we walked into her house and she closed the front door and then locked it. I thought that was strange, but assumed that she didn't want anyone walking in on us or something. I told her that I had to use the bathroom, and I walked into her bathroom, locked the door and looked in the mirror. I just felt strange. I felt like something was off, and I felt myself becoming more drunk from finishing the bottle earlier. I turned on the sink to make some noise and made myself puke up the liquor that I drank. I flushed it and went to the sink and started drinking the tap water out of my hands to sober up. I just didn't want to be drunk, but I still wanted to hook up with Candace, so I wanted to pretend to be drunk, if you catch my drift. I turned the sink off and I could hear her talking to someone. I heard her say, "Yeah, he's drunk as hell. He can barely stand up. You do it." And that was the point where I began to get nervous. Who was she talking to, and do what? I walked out of the bathroom and into the living room, and the moment I stepped into the living room, I saw her walking into another room. All I could see was the back of her head, that strange, very bright red hair go into another room. I didn't see her face or anything, I just saw her kind of walk fast into the room. The living room was pretty dark too. I slurred while I was acting like I was drunk. "Hey, where are you going?" She walked back out of the dark living room and up to me and said, "Let's go into my room." I looked at her bright red hair and then into her eyes, and they were different. Her face was different. It was another girl with the same hair. And that's when I realized that it was another girl with the same wig on. It was a wig the whole time, in fact. She had changed it with the girl from earlier for whatever reason, and my heart felt like it stopped. But I tried to look like I had no idea it was a different girl, and I kind of smiled at her and told her that I just needed to use the bathroom one more time and told her sorry I was so drunk. She said that it's fine, just hurry up in there. I went into the bathroom and locked the door, and I heard her whisper something to someone again this time. I think I heard a male voice whisper back too. I honestly didn't concentrate on listening to exactly what she said though. Something sketchy was definitely going on, and I had to get out of that house. So I opened the bathroom window and just jumped straight out of it and ran faster than I ever ran in my life. I didn't look behind myself or anything, and I just ran through the backyard and jumped the fence and ran through someone else's backyard and hit a road and ran toward the main road. I kept running down the main road until I saw a Star CVS, and I ran into the CVS and stood straight at the front of the store in front of the camera. I called a taxi, and then I just went home. I try to think about what happened that night, and what was she or they planning that night? Why did they tell me a fake name? Why was she trying to get my friend and I so drunk? I thought maybe a robbery, but she kept spending money on us. She kept buying us drinks and even paid for my friend's taxi cab. And mostly, why did she wear a wig that she gave to another girl to wear? Who was she talking to, and what did it mean? And what was in that room that they tried so desperately to lure me into? Let me start by saying that I really enjoy driving, and I'll often be on the road for hours just listening to music and getting lost. So, more often than not, I'll just sleep in my car on the side of a country road. I don't like it when I'm the passenger though, so I always go alone. Usually I sleep for a bit, wake up, then go home without incident. There's been a couple of times when a deer has startled me, or even a person knocking on my window to make sure I was okay was met with a scream, but what happened last night, it takes the absolute cake. So I took my dogs up to a really nice walk that I'd read about online. It was about a 5-hour drive, and I'd planned to drive for an hour at a time, explore for a bit, and then keep going so the dogs didn't get restless or bored. I had taken plenty of food and water and was planning to be gone for about a day, which I was, and was going to park into a popular parking spot that caravanners and the like tend to stay overnight. It was lovely, and myself and the dogs had a really good time. We arrived at our sleeping destination and found that there wasn't any space to park, and the bays were laid out, so you just kind of had to use your common sense and find a spot where you weren't blocking anyone in. The parking area was free and could only contain about 10 cars or vans without it being too tight. So I was a little bit annoyed, but hey, what can you do? It was a very rural area, so I carried on for a little while and pulled into a lay-by to rest before I drove home. I let the dogs out to do their business too, and then just went to sleep, thinking nothing of it. To describe where I parked, it was opposite a little cottage, but not directly in front of it, and there were plenty of trees, so I didn't feel as though I was intruding on the owners in any way. I felt pretty safe, to be honest. For some reason, though, I was having trouble nodding off. Usually, I sleep like a baby in my car because it's very spacious and comfortable. And as silly as it may sound to some, I genuinely thought that I had nothing to worry about. That was until a long, high-pitched scratching sound woke me and my dogs up at around 11 p.m, just after I drifted off. The dogs, they went nuts, as they usually do at the drop of a hat, and I was still in a confused daze when I saw a very tall middle-aged man dragging what I thought was a key around the perimeter of my car. He walked really slowly and didn't take his eyes off of me the entire time. He also had a very malicious grin on his face. Horrified, I cranked my chair up and started the car, ready to floor it, but he had made his way to the front of my bonnet, and trees were blocking me in from reversing. This was when I saw what he was holding, a butcher's knife. He held it up then and sort of waved it at me, and I screamed and laid on the horn, and my dogs had leapt over the back seat and were practically frothing at the mouth at this point. But that didn't seem to faze him. This whole thing lasted about 10 to 15 seconds, not long, and then he just slowly walked away across the road and back into that little cottage. I drove home without stopping after he moved, and I'm never doing that again. And it's a real shame that this genuinely terrifying man has ruined this for me. And yes, the car, the paintwork, it was totally ruined. I don't know if he was just trying to teach me a lesson for parking outside his house or what, but either way, I'll probably be scared for my whole life now. So, I come from a chaotic upbringing. I was born and raised as a child in South Korea, and I later moved to Australia with my mother having lost my father in a homicide. The next few years of my life in Australia were difficult to say the least. Meeting and making friends was a real challenge in the early noughties, particularly since I was quite nerdy and did not speak much English, something that most Australian kids at the time just didn't relate well to. One of my scariest memories, though, was from when I was age 12. At the time, it did not even occur to me just how close I came to potentially losing my life. So my mother and I were on a road trip heading south from Melbourne to stay on the southern coast. We had stopped one evening at a small, well-kept caravan park. The caravan park was quaint and beautiful too. Neat grass, nice flowers, frangipanis blooming, and a small creek which ran along the edge of the premises. And to be honest, it kind of reminded me of home a bit. I spent some time walking around on my own as my mother was taking a nap, and I discovered a game in a pool room. I went inside and spent probably a good few hours playing pool by myself and generally just mucking around when a young boy came in. I was very shy, and so was he, but we eventually talked for a little while and became friendly. I don't remember playing any games with him, but I do recall him being pretty nervous. He kept asking me if I wanted to go back to his caravan as his parents were making dinner soon. At first, I wasn't interested, and I just said no, and we spent some more time doing things and talking as it got later. But he became more pushy and asked if I liked cake and lollies. And of course I said. but that much I do remember clearly. I followed him to his caravan, which was much older than ours and quite dilapidated, and he asked me to wait outside while he talked to his parents. I waited patiently for a few minutes until the door opened and a larger older man with glasses and no shirt opened the door and asked if I would like to come inside for cake. I must admit that I was scared, but I remember feeling like I had to, like it would be rude of me to leave. As I was walking in the door, I heard a man behind me shout, "Hey, what's going on here?" I was quickly grabbed from the collar of my shirt and pulled inside, and the man then quickly tried to lock the door behind me. However, the stranger was too quick and burst into the door. He took my hand abruptly and pulled me outside, and we frantically ran away together. The man asked which unit or room or caravan I was in and took me straight there, and we went inside and my mum yelled at him asking why he was there. I was hiding in the corner crying while he explained what happened. We packed back up that night and we just left immediately after that. I was already heavily on anxiety medication after what happened back home, and we never spoke about it alone again. My mother claimed that it was something that I should talk to a therapist about, but I never did. Every time we spoke about it too, my mother would just leave the room because it scared the hell out of her, and I just really didn't understand why. I guess at that age it's difficult for the brain to comprehend the reality and potential of the situation. Looking back on it now though, it utterly scares me to the point of losing sleep. So this happened when I was 11. I was living in the US at the time with my parents, and we had bought a nice big house in a nice neighborhood, giant backyard and all. We'd been living in this particular house for about 6 months now, so we'd well and truly settled into the place. Got my first dog and everything too, and as a kid this was a real highlight in my life. One day I came home from school and my mum took me aside as soon as I had arrived home. She needed to tell me something, so she sat me down. Turns out that when my dad arrived home from work, he noticed that one of our garden chairs had been taken from our back garden and brought around to one of the side windows at the front, which happened to be by my parents' bedroom window. After checking it out, someone had removed about half of the ceiling that held the window in its frame. With the chair still at the scene, it was concluded that whoever it was probably got spooked, likely by my dad getting up in the night, and whoever it was just bolted. Pretty scary stuff though, knowing that someone had tried to get into one of our windows. Not even an open or unlocked window at that. This guy tried to take the actual window out. When it came to things like this, my mum had a great way of speaking to me like an adult without scaring me, so while I was cautious, I wasn't too worried. She ended up taking a few new hobbies, like meeting me off the bus and checking on me in the middle of the night and whatnot. I'm an only kid and was a pretty independent one at that, so this was a bit strange, but I understood the reasoning. We figured it was an attempt at petty theft, so we just left it at that. Besides, what could really happen? I mean, my dad was a pretty big dude, and I had this awesome new guard dog, right? I felt safe. Over the course of the next few weeks, a few of our neighbours were broken into and burglarized in amongst a few attempts at our house, and so we definitely had a thief on our hands. In that time, my dad stepped up our home security too, a few motion lights here and there and extra locks too. About a week passed before it happened again, and my mum could hear someone walking around outside of the house, so she crept up and tried to take a look. She couldn't see anything, so went about the house looking through each window, and she knew that someone was there, but she just couldn't catch a glimpse of him. And this was the catalyst that started a month from hell. In order to keep this from getting too long, I'll try and summarize what happened up until the night that we caught this prick. So, my mum became a wreck, and she moved herself into the spare room at the front of the house so that she could see out the bigger window and be nearer my room. Sometimes she'd sleep in the living room too, because you could see both the living room and the kitchen windows from there. She always had a golf club with her too, and she lost sleep and work suffered, and things got pretty bad. During this time, my dad wasn't exactly the hero that we'd all expected. He's a dead heavy sleeper and chalked it all up to my mum being paranoid. One evening, when she could hear the creep, she tried to wake him up too, and he promptly went back to sleep. Great effort, Dad. Anyway, by this point in my life, I was a night owl. I'd stay up until late to watch Adult Swim and chill with my dog, and one night at about 1:30 a.m. I think it was, I was sitting in my room just doing that stuff, and suddenly, Jeffrey had this deep, menacing rumble coming from him. He'd been with us for a while by that time, and I'd never heard anything like that come from him. I asked him what was up, and he just carried on with this alien noise, staring dead center at one of the windows as if he could see through the damn thing. The blinds were drawn, so I just sat there, silently freaking out, imagining what was on the other side of that wall and how it was making my dog do this. Not 1 minute later, I heard my mum scream at the top of her lungs, and I quote, "What the fuck? Yeah, I've seen you now, fucker." Time pretty much stopped then and there, and I don't know if it was my kid imagination, but I shit you not. In that moment, Jeffrey and I looked at each other, both mouth agape, frozen by what we'd heard. I don't really remember getting up and running through the hall to my living room, but I got there just in time to see my sweet little mum fly out that fucking door with her trusty golf club, chasing this motherfucker like Usain Bolt chasing the gold. I'd never seen her move so fast. By this time, my dad had decided to wake up enough to come through to take the reins and call the police and whatnot. Jeff had bolted out the door after my mum and at one point caught up with her before she stopped at the end of the street. But she was screaming anything and everything at this point, from "I'll fucking get you" and "You're fucking done" to incoherent mess. I watched like a drone as she came back to the house, dog in tow, and I just sat down on the couch, entirely unsure of what the hell just happened. She took the phone and gave them a perfect description too. He'd been walking around the front of the house apparently, where she was in the spare room, and by this point we'd installed motion lights. This guy wouldn't let up. Autumn was upon us and leaves were falling, so she heard the crunch outside too. She timed it perfectly to get a good look at this guy, and after a month she finally saw him pass the window when she happened to be looking out, and his face was flooded with light from the new motion light situated by the window. Apparently, he heard her when she screamed and paused like a deer caught in the literal headlights and looked dead straight into the window before taking off down the road. It took about 5 minutes for the police to arrive, and a few cars had been dispatched, one of them to us and the rest out to the neighborhood streets. 10 minutes later, one of them got a call to say that they got him. Soon he was parked up on the street in a cruiser so that my mum could identify him, and sure enough, it was him. They'd actually grabbed him a few streets up from our house too. And this is the part that makes my stomach turn. Turns out that he wasn't just the persistent klepto that we had believed. I was standing by the front door when I heard through one of the officer's radios that this guy was a registered sex offender. I was a bit naive at that point, and I kind of got what it meant, but it wasn't until I got older and was talking to my mum about it that a few more details came out too. Unbeknownst to me at the time, my mum was very much aware of what happened with this guy. Turns out that he'd been convicted of raping a 12-year-old girl. I'm not sure how long he was locked away for, but at some point, he managed to get out for whatever reason and moved into one of the houses a few streets over from us. Coincidentally, in viewpoint of where I'd got on and off of the school bus too. He was on parole, so was promptly thrown back in jail, mind you, and this is where my knowledge of him ends, and I've never wanted to pursue knowing anything further, to be honest. Even worse though, one of our family friends that lived on the same street as him had received a letter to say that he was registered and staying in the area. And I shit you not, we were within a 3-minute walk from their house. We saw this woman so often, and we still really don't get how or why she never thought to bring it up. I mean, she had 2 kids herself. We ended up moving to the UK 2 months later for reasons unrelated. I won't lie, but that time was pretty stressful. We didn't feel entirely comfortable in our home anymore, and moving to another country kind of wrecked me at that age. Once we started our new life there, I didn't think much of it after that. I mean, I had bigger issues, right? This guy was persistent, but he was in jail and wasn't going to travel to the UK to get me or anything. I was rational about my fear, so found it fairly easy to just move on at the time. I've been thinking about it a lot more the older I've gotten though, so I guess this is a more of a cathartic post than anything else. And so, I sure hope nothing like this happens again, but thanks for listening. So I'll begin by saying that I live in an apartment building with 5 connected 2-story townhomes. My next door neighbour is the last home in the building, and he seemed just like a normal guy so far. He told us that he has bipolar, anxiety, and PTSD though, and to be honest, that's pretty fine. I mean, he hasn't done anything out of the ordinary. I even provided him with some information about how to get some counselling sessions. Last night, my partner and I got home though, and he was smoking outside his house. Whatever, I mean, he had a short conversation with us, and he apologised for his friend getting drunk, and he had to stop him from going on a shooting spree, and okay, I didn't hear too much, but it was weird, and we were both tired from work, so we just kind of wrote it off. Fast forward a little bit, and my partner and I have been laying in bed for approximately 30 minutes, and it's 2 a.m. in the morning, and we hear a knock. I feel like deep down inside, I wanted to believe it was the neighbour's door, maybe a friend had come over or something, but there's another knock, and it's definitely our door. There's another knock, and another one, and there became less and less time between each knocking. My partner and I look at each other, and we honestly didn't know what to do. I mean, this was the 6th or 7th knock at this point, and as we open our mouths to discuss our options, there's an insanely loud bang, and this guy is either hitting or kicking our door now, so hard the windows are shaking, in fact, in their frames, and that's when the howling started too. There was this guttural, demonic howling, screaming, and horrific moaning. My partner grabs my best chef knife, and I curl myself into the corner of my hallway, unsure of what to do. Call 911? Yeah, he says, call now. My partner is braver than I am and went down the stairs into the door. Through the window, my partner says that it's 2 a.m, we're sleeping, what are you doing? And just like that, this weirdo, he snaps back to his normal personality and just says in this meek voice, oh yeah, sorry, I'm sorry, and then walks away. I mean, what in the ever-loving heck? So, my partner comes back up the stairs, and we're both just tucked in the corner of the hallway listening to this guy's footsteps in the attached unit. It seemed like forever for the cops to arrive, and it's probably 20 minutes, but I'm just semi-hyperventilating in the corner of my hallway with a chef knife in hand's reach, just listening. I don't know what I thought would happen. I just didn't want him to come back or have another episode, so I listened. Cops came and talked to both parties and contacted my landlord this morning, and apparently this guy had already contacted landlord to complain about the noise that we were making. I mean, what the hell, right? Anyway, he's still our neighbor for the time being, and we don't really know what to do or where to go from here. Do you guys have any ideas? I'm a sheriff's deputy in a fairly busy county, so we see and hear strange things all the time, but this gives me chills. There's an abandoned house in a rural area of the country that sits a good ways back into the woods. Every so often, our dispatch will receive a 911 call from a landline at the residence with nothing but white noise. The dispatcher asks if anyone is there, but they never get an answer. Since it's an open 911 call and we know the address, we have to respond, and every time we do, there's no one there. The oddest thing, though, is that there's no electricity or any signs of wiring going to the house, and every deputy that's been there gets a feeling of dread just being on the property. I'm not sure of the history of the house, so I don't know what could be there. Oh, and I'm working in the zone of this house tonight, so I'll try and go by and snap a photo of the house if I can. Update. So, on the way to the property, I found a vehicle driving on the wrong side of the road, so I'm at the jail finishing paperwork on the DWI, and I'll post the pictures as soon as I can. At the latest, it'll be 0800 hours Central Time. Update. So, to preface this part of this account, I consider myself to be pretty rational when it comes to odd situations like this, but I am open to the idea of supernatural activity. I posted here because this is one of those cases that I felt like you guys might enjoy. and to see if anyone might have any possible explanations or similar instances. Apparently, there's actually a few stories out there very similar to mine. I'm not in for any street cred, it's just an interesting story that I wanted to share. Anyways, this is my first time walking up to this place, so it was definitely an experience, that's for sure. The trail is gated off, so I had to walk it. It's about 200 yards back into the woods through very dense brush and trees. There was nearly zero loom on the trail, and I really had to watch my step even with my flashlight. I actually jumped a deer on the way up, and it scared the living hell out of me. But once I turned the corner at the end of the trail and saw the house, my heart started racing, and I honestly felt like something was there with me. I started messing with my flashlight and phone and notepad, trying to get a photo of the verification with the house when I just felt that I needed to leave. It wasn't a feeling of I shouldn't be here, but more of a you need to get the fuck out of there, dodge now. And having been in very stressful situations in the past, I've learned to trust that feeling. I got the best photos I could and sped walked back down the trail towards my car. I'm almost embarrassed to say that I legitimately felt something was following me. But I made it back to the car and sat with my spotlight pointed at the trailhead, just waiting to see if something came out of the woods. Fortunately, nothing did. I sat for a minute and caught my breath while I reviewed the photos, hoping that what I got was sufficient because I did not want to go back. I'm about to go off duty actually, and so this is it for the day. I'm really interested in what the hell happened at this place, and I actually plan to do some more research tomorrow. Sunday nights are usually extremely slow for us anyway. Update. So, I've been doing some research between calls tonight, and I have some history on the property. The house was built in 1890, and the first deed on file was registered in 1901. The property has since been in possession of the family that owns it today. From what I could find, the current owners of the property live out of state now, but had previously lived either in the house or on the property some years back. The area it's on was a boom town during the late 1800s, but fizzled out shortly afterwards due to a lack of profits from the mines. Other than that, I haven't found anything that makes the property stand out. On a more speculative note, though, the house sits close to an area where a Native American tribe was known to reside. I'll dig deeper into the history of the property and the family and see what I can find out. Thanks again for all of the comments and advice, guys. It's really appreciated. Update. So, I've been spending some time with family the past couple of days, and I haven't gotten much done, so sorry for the lack of updates. I actually have the name of the person who has the deed on the property, but contacting them has been a bit of a task. I plan to go back to the house tomorrow during the day, so more photos should follow. In the meantime, I'll keep digging around. So this account is an odd one, and I've only recently felt comfortable telling it to anyone other than immediate family and close friends. I completely understand if it's hard to believe. I've been somewhat skeptical of what occurred for the past 10 years, in fact. Regardless of what the cause of the incident was, it's an experience that I feel is best shared here. So, the summer of 2008, I had the opportunity to go to a small community in Nicaragua for a week-long mission trip. There were 30 or so members in this group. However, I only knew 2 people, a young couple from my church. I was 16 years old at the time, and it was my first time going to another country without any of my family there with me, so I was both proud to feel like an adult and scared shitless having to be an adult. I had been to Eastern Europe the year before on a smaller mission, so I went into this trip with the same expectations. Those expectations quickly changed, though, on the 2-hour bus ride from the airport to where we were staying. The highway was poorly paved when there was pavement to speak of. The cities and towns were filled with dilapidated huts and businesses, and malnourished livestock and dogs roamed the streets everywhere, and it truly was just another world. Once at the mission house, we unpacked our belongings and gathered into the main room for a meet and greet and briefing, and among the 30 people there were several pastors, a few interpreters, a very cute girl who was several years older than me too. And despite being somewhat distracted by my newfound mission crush, I specifically remember the warnings we received about the area. We were told the communities we would be in were full of gang activity and to always stay in groups of no less than 3 in certain areas. And as if that weren't enough to worry me, we were told that black magic and witchcraft were common practice and practitioners were known to put curses on people they felt were opposing their beliefs. Needless to say, being a part of a Christian mission in their turf did not bring me any comfort whatsoever. And surprisingly enough, the week actually went pretty smooth and was filled with awesome people and amazing experiences. But the whole time there was this, what felt to be, for a lack of a better term, a darkness that followed the group. No matter where we went or what we were doing, there was an unexplained feeling of there being something wrong. Every member of the group whom I spoke with about the matter said that they felt the same thing too. Close to the end of the week, I felt like we found where the darkness lived too. The weather had turned bad that morning as a small group of us loaded up the bus and started down the road. Hurricane Alma would make landfall the next day. We weren't told where we were going, only that we were going to hand out food to some locals. We turned off the main highway and down a dirt road which wound between seemingly abandoned buildings. With each turn we made, more and more garbage appeared on the side of the road until it was apparent that we were entering a landfill. The bus came to a stop when hills of trash became just visible everywhere. I remember thinking to myself that there's absolutely no way that anyone could be living here. And almost as an answer to my thoughts, pieces of cardboard began to move as people began emerging from the trash shelters and walking towards where we were parked. And by this time, the rain had turned into an absolute downpour, and the ruts of the road were now muddy streams emptying into the landfill. The sadness that I felt for these people turned into heartbreak when I actually saw a small girl being led by a young woman in the group. The food truck pulled up behind our bus, and we all stood to exit when the group leader deemed it too wet for us to get out and help hand out the food and whatnot. And myself and several others protested, but were ultimately overruled. I know it's cheesy to say, but to this day I still feel the sadness and anger I felt seeing those people watch as our bus turned around and just drove away. The next night was our last in the area, and we held an assembly for the community at a local baseball stadium. The rain had broken an hour before it started, and several hundred locals filled the stands as the service began. The rain had actually shorted out the sound system too, so the preacher stood atop the bus, which had been pulled into a pitcher's mound, and shared a megaphone with the interpreter for the duration of his message. Afterwards, he invited everyone onto the field to speak with us. To our surprise, nearly everyone in the stands came center field, all seemingly eager to speak with us. A middle-aged woman introduced me to her daughter and encouraged her to practice her English with me too. Several minutes into our conversation, and we were interrupted by a member of our group grabbing me by the shoulder. With an unsettling urgency in his voice, he said that they needed help and quickly walked through the crowd into the direction of third base. I excused myself from the conversation and began to follow when I noticed large numbers of people just quickly moving away from the direction that he went. As I cleared through the crowd, I saw nearly all of the men in our group holding someone to the ground. Thinking that something terrible had happened, I ran towards the pile. As I approached, the man who had asked for my help told me to cross the person's ankles and hold them down. Hesitantly, I did so, and the person was screaming at the top of their lungs and kicking their legs with what seemed to be superhuman strength. I looked towards the person's face, and to this day, I wish I had it. The subject of the commotion was a young local man who was of a wiry build. He was wearing dirty clothes and stank to high heaven, and his face was contorted to the point of seeming inhuman, and his mouth was open so wide it was almost as if his jaw had been unhinged or something. His eyes were rolled into the back of his head, and his head whipped side to side as he screamed. The men closest to his head were holding his arms out to the side, and the rest of the group formed a semicircle behind them and were all praying aloud. I then realized that we were holding this man in the form of a crucifix, and I suddenly put two and two together. Paralyzed with fear, I held the man's ankles as tight as I could and stared at his face as the group was commanding a demon to exit his body in the name of Jesus. I wanted to let go and get as far away from the situation as I could, but I just couldn't bring myself to move. The man then suddenly stopped fighting and began slowly moving his head back and forth. A lady in our group, who I found out later had written a book on demonology or something, demanded this demon to tell her his name. The man stopped moving and took a deep breath and then screamed, "We are Rage." And the name was so loud that it actually hurt my ears. But amazingly, the voice was, for a lack of a better word, demonic, and honestly, sounded like two people speaking at once. The woman who had first seemed unshaken showed concern too and told us to let go of him. Now, how I've described what happened next is a little bit odd, but it's been the best analogy that I've been able to think of. If you've ever seen a spider die, sprayed with poison or stepped on, you've seen how its legs curl and form in somewhat of a ball kind of thing. As if his arms and legs were spring-loaded, they just snapped hard to his body and he curled up into a ball and began writhing around in the grass. We all backed up and the praying stopped, except for my mission crush, who was standing apart from the group, crying and praying aloud. The man just went limp face down on the ground with his head pointed towards the girl. Her praying became more intense as she cried harder when the man, without lifting his head, began pulling himself along the grass towards her with only his arms. She slowly backed away while continuing to pray as the man slowly dragged his body towards her. Anger suddenly washed over me and I actually started running towards the man with the intent of kicking him in the head, but was stopped by two of the men in the group. The girl stopped praying and the man just went limp for the last time. An ambulance had apparently been called and the crew rushed into the field with a stretcher and loaded the unconscious man up. It was then that I realized that I had seen him the day before at the landfill. He was one of the people who had emerged from the trash shelters and watched as we drove away. Once the incident was over, we loaded onto the bus and started back to the mission house. The woman who had asked the demon its name came and sat beside me and tried to explain what we had just witnessed. Long story short, there was supposedly a legion of demons inside the man and it was unsafe for us to challenge them. The preacher who the man had initially approached said that the man did not speak English and fell to the ground in convulsions as soon as he laid his hand on his shoulder. Now, I'm not the most spiritual or religious person, and I try to consider things logically before making assumptions of supernatural inference. I considered that the man was simply having a seizure, but after witnessing multiple seizure victims afterwards, it just doesn't match up. Some sort of neurological disorder or psychosis may explain parts of the man's behavior, but I've not been able to say that that's what it was for certain. Demon or not, this was a very unique and terrifying experience, and it's one that will stick with me for the rest of my life.